After a lot of struggle, I was about to start my own business, a home furnishing business. We would go to our clients and furnish their houses in very stylish and aesthetically pleasing way. And the best bit about us was that we were economical and luxurious, however the client pleased. We were pretty certain that our business was in the right shape, and we're definitely certain about achieving our quarterly goals. The main focus of our business was to make a client list that could put us onto the map of influential people and earn ourselves a position. As we completely shifted our focus to relationship building and client management, we tend to get more and more outwardly and active in our professional pursuits. One day during the promotional discount week, we got a call from the Douglas Mansion. Now, if you don't know the Douglas Mansion, let me put it this way. If you are in the Douglas Mansion, you are one of the most important people in the city. That was the call that had the potential to not just put us on a map in the city, but the whole country. So we asked, and it was the old Mr. Douglas himself. And he asked, "So yes, you can clean and furnish things in my room, can you?" And I replied, "Yes, sir, we do." To which he said, "You will do it spick clean." And then I said, "Yes, sir. Cleaner than any cleanest spot in your mansion right now." Mr. Douglas said jokingly, "Well, I hope you do. It is a mess in here. And yes, you do have to sign NDA and some documents. We will hold you liable if anything is lost." At first I hesitated, but then it was the big break we surely could have used, and I agreed to his terms. It was pretty sure that once I entered the house, my business will definitely take off amongst the likes of these multi-billionaires, and I was in no way ready to let this one opportunity go away. So instead of sending off my usual people, I myself took charge and made a team of the other two people who originally started this business with me, and we went to the mansion the very next day. Upon entering and parking our car in the big driveway, and before entering the house through the big door in front, a guard came with a bunch of NDA and contractual papers. He gave us the envelope, but told us to sign the NDA before entering. Knowing this to be the opportunity of lifetime, we were ready to sign them. The worst scenario that we had in our mind was of a sexual dungeon that we just might discover in the basement. As we enter, we are greeted at the staircase with Mr. Douglas, the owner of the mansion. He asked us if we had signed the NDA or not, and upon telling him that we have, he decided to tell us a short story as we started walking up the stairs. My son returned later last night. He was a bit intoxicated and he came up to my room. He decided to indulge a bit of intervention with his dear old dad. I was in my bed in the sheets, and he came closer and told me that he had ideas to make the company better, and I told him that we will talk business in the morning, but he was quite adamant about telling me now. So he took his gun and then pointed me. Definitely some kind of distrust thing going on with kids and parents. But Emily, her girlfriend, who was sleeping with me and was behind the curtains at the time, came in and smashed the ashtray on his head. He turned in pain and shot her 3 times. We gave a little smirk, thinking maybe billionaires have twisted humor. He stopped in his tracks and then opened up a room near the balcony. And as we entered, we were blank in shock. His son was lying on the bed with the bandages around his head, while the family doctor stood there checking his vitals as if he was unhinged by the room. Mr. Douglas continued, "Yeah, so she died, and he made it. It wasn't that rough on him, but he did stupidly shoot the poor girl. She was going in bed, I must tell you that. Very good, these young ones." I was in total shock, and I couldn't shake myself back to the present. And as I tried my best to compose myself, "Well, you did sign the NDA, so in case you want to go and try tell this to people, you will be legally held for this, and by the looks of you, you definitely will not be able to pay me $10 million. So it is better that you get back to work, and I will put in a good name for you with my friends. And do look in the envelope, it is pretty sweet." We just witnessed a murder confession, and we did try to mumble our way out, but we had no choice. Me and the other 3 partners gathered together, and we realized that there is no way out because of the NDA. So the only reasonable thing at the moment was to do that. We did refuse him the service, but his crazy-looking security guards were very stern and definitely looked as if they would kill us. We were scared, confused, and very much in a moral conflict. We decided to open up the envelope, and there it was. The number of zeros in the envelope made us forget about the moral conflict. There was a spark in the eyes, and as we were busy thinking how to go through with it, some of the security guys dragged a fridge inside and told us to dispose the body in the fridge. And then they just walked away. Seeing the doctor was out and the guards too, I decided to take the photographs of the crime scene just in case it is ever needed in future, not to forget the moral conflict that seemed to have gone with the money was actually there building within. I store the photographs in the cloud, just in case they tried to go through my phone once we were done. We arranged everything and made the room cleaner than it ever was. The blood-soaked carpet was completely spick, with no sign of visible spot anywhere. They were rearranged and replaced with a place smelt like lavender and rose instead of death. Mr. Douglas was happy with our job, as the doctor guided the guards to take the body to the basement. Turns out the doctor will then use the organs and black market, and this was not the first time that they have done it. And I wondered about the countless victims that might have not gotten justice. But then my darker side of greed did take over, and I ended up helping him completely rid that room of any signs of violence, and even made it much more beautiful than he was. And that is how the visit started. It was Mr. Douglas at first, and then it started happening with all his rich friends too, Ancelotti, the Silverbergs, Weinsteins. We were all busy cleaning up their messes and were making really good money. In the next 5 years, we did build our business to top, but it all worked in the shadows, cleaning the filth of the richest scum on the planet. I waited for 5 years, through and through, going through this moral hell. Finally, with enough money to bail me out from the NDA, I went to see a lawyer. I told him about everything that happened with us through those 5 years and explained to him about things we went through. He looked at me and said, "It is a little too late for you to be morally woke now. You tell the police, they will put you behind for a long time. You have been an accessory and accomplice in the murders. So if you are ready to risk yourself to go to prison, then yeah, we can proceed." A dark, silent chill went across my spine, making me wonder and making me question my own morality. And as I stood there asking myself, am I willing to risk my own freedom? I received a call. It was Mr. Douglas. "Hey, send your boys, will you? I think my son made a mess again." I hung up and looked out the window. As the sun was going down, I had to make a choice, and so I did. As we entered the Douglas mansion, we saw that Mr. Douglas had killed his son. Hey guys, thanks so much for all the support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so. It all started on the last day of school, when we said each other goodbyes and started walking back to our houses. It was a cold winter afternoon, and the roads were packed with fresh snow, and through the streams of students walking by, you can hear a thud of someone falling at regular intervals. Our black leather shoes were just not made for the snow. The regular thuds and the giggles as everyone would take a fall, and I was giggling when my friend fell. I was the next one, and as I fell, I took my other friend with me, and down we did go. We got up, dusted the pants, and me and my friend who fell took the normal route, while another friend of ours took the different routes, but we exchanged the backpacks, as ours was heavier and they were going to take a shortcut. They took our bags and we took theirs, just to even things out, and we started walking. We were at the famous square point when a car took a one-way turn and approached us from behind. We had no idea of this happening, and we were busy talking and making our way back to our dorms. Suddenly, I felt a hand grabbing me from behind. For split seconds, I thought it was someone I knew. I looked back. They were strangers. And there, in split seconds, I made the decision and let my friend's bag go and started running, and so did my friend. The passerby tried to intervene, but they fired shots in the air, and as they did, everyone made their way and dispersed, and we stopped right where we were. And I could see it was my friend. He was down. The bullet that they allegedly shot in fire must have ricocheted and hit him slightly and is cutting it. He was screaming in pain, and I was hiding behind the square bunch when they approached my friend. And as they did, I thought they might hurt him, so I got out. They slapped my friend and picked me up and dropped me in the car and headed to a secluded location. After a while, they decided to ask me to write a letter to my parents, telling them how I've been kidnapped, and they said they will deliver it to my house. They asked me to add their number to have a chat, so I wrote the letter, and then, without asking me the address, went on to deliver it. And then they waited. They never showed me their face. I told them I was angry, and they did arrange some pizza and Coca-Cola for me. They waited for 2 days, and there was no response. They thought the address they used was wrong, and they decided to cross-check it with me. And when I gave them the address, they realized that they had it wrong in the first place. They sent the letter via their secret accomplice. They told me why they kidnapped me. They said that my father was responsible for making the life of the people of the neighborhood hell. He told me that my father approved an industry that poisoned their water supply and killed most of their people. They even had the evidence to prove. All they needed was media to go on and disclose it. But it failed when media decided not to expose the tycoon. So instead, they decided to kidnap me and do it via live television. As they told me this, I realized that they have got the wrong person. And as I told them, they decided to have a decent conversations. They were ready to let me go since they weren't really criminal. All they wanted to do was a right thing. They just didn't know the way to do so. So they decided to come up with a plan where they would push me in front of a media office with all the evidence and record it all live on their media phones and upload it. They also uploaded all the evidence firsthand into the drive that they gave me access and asked me to give it to someone who I can trust. They apologized as they said they will push me when they let me out. And so they did. They pushed me out from the car. It was the same media house that covered my story of kidnapping, and with all the evidence, as I was lying on the floor as they pushed me, people picked me up, and I was comforted in the waiting room. But I got up and straight away gave the copy of evidence to the editor and passed out. Turns out, I was in shock even if I didn't look scared. I woke up in my home, and the first thing I did was turn up the television. And I was glad to see that they decided to run the news, and the tycoon was arrested, and he was none other than the father of my friend who went with me. We never realized he was that rich. Turns out, I was credited for bringing in the evidence, and police did ask and hassle me with questions for the next few days. But I kept the secret with me. They never caught those who kidnapped me, and I never snitched. My friend stopped talking to me as he blamed me for his father's arrest. He eventually left the place and moved away. A month later, I was at the local cake shop where I ordered a pastry to go. The man did not charge me and told me that I can come to the place for a treat anytime. I recognized his voice and nodded as I smiled. And to this day, I am still friends with the baker. The very baker that kidnapped me along with his friends. As I graduated with an engineering degree, I struggled to find a job with a growth, and to be honest, I wasn't very good at engineering. I did the degree because at the time it looked quite lucrative, and after a series of failing jobs and lost career path, I was out to find a new one. The key skill that I had was the ability to deal with people, and so I did. I stepped into the real estate business, thinking it'd be an easy going as communicating with people come very natural to me. So after learning the basis of what and what not to do in the industry, I joined up with an agency and started doing these frequent client visits. It took me around a year and all the good and bad experiences to quickly make my way to the top ranks. It was almost as if I was made to do this. It was then that the firm decided to make me manage a complete area instead of just single visits in the house. So now the real estate agents were working under my supervision and guidance. I taught them the ways to interact and the steps on how they can really sell a house during client visits. Forming a team, I taught them the most efficient ways to optimize open houses. Soon, our team was one of the best, and we were competing toe-to-toe with our rivals at Thompson Real Estate. All we needed was one more sold house to become number one. The call-in came from Emily. There was a client that wanted to visit the Pendleton Mansion. It was the mansion that would put us on the national map and a leading firm and real estate firm in the country. Emily came to me asking me a favor as the client who wanted to visit the mansion at night. It was an unusual request, but it was the chance that we were not willing to miss. So I decided to give the client visit on my own instead. I myself did not want to put Emily in any unforeseen trouble that might come forth if anything goes sideways. So I decided to handle this meeting on my own. And instead of doing the normal client protocol, I decided to stir it up a little bit. There were 3 houses that I lined up for them, and to make sure that no commotion is created, I selected the 3 houses right on the center of the city. Since they asked for the pretty vintage style, they were very selective houses that I had chose and were quite pricey, and surprisingly, they did say that budget was no problem and that I could go on to the maximum of it. I was arranging things at the first house when I heard a commotion on the outside. I went outside and saw the family waiting over the lawn. They were all dressed very well, and it was certain that they did not like the house. So I got outside and greeted them. They looked at the house and they were skeptical about it. They liked neither the house nor the neighborhood. And for once, I agreed. The neighborhood did seem a bit noisy and were giving weird stares, so I gave them the address to another house and told them to visit it next night. Next night, the family reached before I could go on and arrange the house, standing in the lawn waiting for me. I greeted them, and we entered the house and started discussing the rooms. They asked if they could keep tenants here, and unfortunately the neighborhood did not allow that. And the fact that this was yet another nosy neighborhood made them walk away from the house. Hopefully, I was waiting to sign the 3rd house and was a bit confident about it, since there was no immediate neighbor. They arrived before me as usual and waited. They entered and were immediately in love with the place. They were digging the eerie vibe the place had and were quite happy with it. The house looked like the Gatsby house, and the seclusion from people and still being in the city was something they adored. They were keen on finalizing the deal, and so I took the papers out. I was set and done for the night, when they said that they will sign it the next night and they wanted to stay for the night at the house. They put on some music that I had selected for the furnishing and just started slow dancing. Their daughter, who must have been around 22, held my hand and started slow dancing with me. It was certain that the deal was final. So I entertained the thought of slow dancing with her. As a matter of fact, she was beautiful. A bit pale, but beautiful, and I was 27 and single. So for once, I did entertain the idea. She asked me if she would like to join her for the dinner the next night, and then the whole family extended the invitation, and I said sure. They insisted on staying the night at the mansion, and I did not mind since paperwork was almost done and they were pretty final about it. As I left the house and kept moving forward towards my car that was parked in the distance, a man approached me. He had a set of long binoculars in his hand, and it made me go into the alert mode since he was giving me all the vibes of a stalker. But then he looked at me and said, "You don't look crazy." I asked what he was talking about, and then went on to tell me that I was dancing alone in the abandoned house. I told him I was the real estate agent and showing the house to a family. He pulled up his binoculars toward the house and exclaimed, "What family?" And then he handed me the binocular, and as I held it and watched, there was no one. So I opened the door and decided to check back. The man followed me this time. I called out for the family, but nobody came, and I assumed maybe they left. I was pissed at first because of the carelessness they just showed, so I went on to lock the door. The man with me continued, "What are you doing?" I told him I was locking the door so no one could enter and steal. The man said, "There is no door, mate. What are you closing?" And as I looked back, all I could see was a broken home, riddled with grass and several plastered cracks. The house was as old as one can get. There was no house, no family, and apparently, I wasn't a real estate agent. Well, not when I was alive anyway. I remember that I am just reliving my memories, and that house was the last one I had. I was shortly murdered on my way back from that house, and my murder was none other than the man with binoculars. I relive the memories of my life every single day and forget about them, almost as if I'm alive. I was the manager at the local bombshell restaurant. It was my first gig as the manager, and I was pretty excited to start my work there. I wanted to manage a gourmet restaurant, but it was not bad for the first time. And to my advantage, there was really hot girls working in the place, so I was trying to get laid myself. My first day as a manager was very hectic. There were so many creeps that would walk in the place, and I had to get rid of all of them for good. There were so many confrontations that I had to be part of because some Karen thought that one of our servers was flirting with her husband. The job of managing that place wasn't as simple as I thought it would be. It was constant chaos and anger issues. People would start a fight for no good reason, and being in Miami, I was always afraid of an idiot carrying a gun, barging in and getting into a confrontation with staff and shooting me. So I was always on my toes whenever something suspicious arrived. The first week was tough because I was learning and getting the taste of the ground and making a bond with our regulars. And then there was our server, Karina. She had people round up around her night and day, and almost everyone wanted Karina to serve them. She even knew about that and started flirting with everyone, and that was the reason that most Karens were sick of Karina. I had to especially make her stop doing the night shift because of what happened in December night, the last day of the year. It was New Year, so we were clearly packed by people, and there was no way that we could even get second off for a breather. And then at 11, we decided to admit anyone in the house tables were already full, and people were ordering drinks like it was the last day on earth. Karina got off from the break and decided to serve up the drinks, and as she did, almost all drunk men got something convoluted in their ear, and all that saw was a hot woman serving up drinks. And now, instead of asking servers, they were specifically asking for Karina. One of them stood up and said, "Karina, baby, can you bring me back 2 shots of Jack Daniels?" And then one from another ended up saying, "Karina, darling, give me a scotch, please." And then in a few minutes, every drunk man in the restaurant was ordering a drink from Karina. And whenever someone else brought them a drink, they would shout, and that evening, Karina went from one place to another, just serving up drinks, all tired. I decided to give her the break. It would have been too much for anyone, and as I gave her the break, the men in the restaurant just exploded and just kept shouting, "Karina!" loudly. It was crazy, and I was tired. And I told them if they did not stop the hooliganism, they were showing nobody will be served. And the drunk men were quiet for a while. And then when Karina got back, she was bringing the tab to me, when suddenly, one of the drunk men grabbed her and started pressing her breast and touching her inappropriately, and I yelled at them and went on to get her away from the bastards. I picked the man up from the collar and kicked him out of the place. The place was silent for a bit, but then they started once more in their stupid, drunk, horny requests, and I was sick of these people to my stomach. It was almost around 12, and I had to shut the restaurant knowing that there is so much potential still waiting to be sucked out of this drunk customer, but I did not do it, and decided to close the place, and I had to get them all personally kicked out of the restaurant. It wasn't something I liked, but it had to be done. They were turning into mad dogs. Some went away on their own, but for some I had to order a taxi myself. I spent $200 that night. just because of all the cabs that I had to order. Those who were accompanied by their wives, I wondered if their marriage stayed tight the next year, knowing the act they were pulling off watching Karina. Our whole staff was gone. It was just me, Karina, and a couple of security guys. We were having drinks after having a pretty reckless and chaotic day, and we didn't care for anything. The place was signaled closed, and as the clock ticked and the year turned new, we stood at the bar in the restaurant, tired and speechless. I was holding Karina's hand. She came forward to me and kissed me and said, "Thank you for always looking out for me." And as I pressed her lips with mine, I looked at her and said, "Always." We were looking each other in the eye as we were kissing. The security guards were wasted and were sleeping like they were in the bar. And then suddenly, our kiss was broke by the loud noise of gunshots. At first, we thought maybe it was the fireworks in play, but then I saw that we were being shot at. I quickly woke the guys up and sent Karina to the basement. We stayed ducked down at the bar and just kept our heads down. They were continuously firing at the restaurant, and it was almost as if the bullets are raining. One of our security guards was slashed by a surprising bullet, but other than that, there were no injuries. I told everyone to move to the basement storage, and they did that. I stayed down at the bar to look for who the hell was doing that. And then the drunk man from earlier came inside shouting, "Karina, I'm here to take you with me. Let's go, baby. Let's not hang out with these pansy-ass bitches." He was holding an automatic rifle. Now I think it was an Uzi, and I was ducking down knowing that he will not hesitate to shoot me because of how I threw him out of the restaurant. And then I found my window as he took a break to vomit. And then I quickly jump-started him, disarmed him, and then just stood there and called the security guys out. They did a number on that idiot, and then called in the police and handed him over. And as it all happened, the guys in the blue asked if we were okay. We all shrugged our shoulders and said, "Just another day in Miami. Am I right or am I right?" The guys in blue agreed, wished us Happy New Year, and we all went our ways. Well, since that day, Karina was never called in for night shift.
We moved to Tulsa in 1986, right around the time Ghostbusters was becoming the new hit thing. The house that we moved to was about 50 years old, but the land it was built upon was registered to the very beginning of the country. As a kid myself, the place was becoming a scene out of movie for me. There were reports of several haunting incidents in the place. I soon became friends with Donnie. He was the local boy who knew the place by heart, and most importantly, he was also into the haunting mania. It was then that Donnie told me about the gruesome murder that took place where I lived 75 years before the new house was built. He told me that a father went on to kill his whole family because of paranoia, but the story is different. The place was cursed. But ever since the new house was built, nobody really heard about the curse again, as if the paranormal was normal again. I asked him about the previous family who lived here. He told me that the house was foreclosed because the man who lived here was unable to pay the mortgage and the bank seized the property. He told me the man also went through a terrible divorce and was alone in the fairly big house. We were playing with the Ouija board in the basement when my brother came back from school and told us that Mr. Parkson had hanged himself right in front of the schoolyard just moments ago, and the police had been called, and if we want to see the hanging body, we should hurry. It was something terrible to do at the time, but we were naive and we hadn't seen a dead body before, so we got on our bikes and hurried. The crowd was already gathered when we reached, and the ambulance and the police had just arrived. We saw the whole thing, and surprisingly, we were rather more intrigued than scared. We wanted to look the body up close, but there was no way they were letting anyone near the body. It was surprising for a lot of them, as Mr. Parkson never came across as someone who would kill himself, and that too hanging in front of the whole school. A lot of children were traumatized by this, but not us. For us, the needed intensity of trauma would have been much higher, and that is what made us different from every other kid in the town. As they shoved the body in the ambulance and cleared out the place, we decided to investigate the case on our own. So we sneaked back to his room in the school and tried to figure out what led to him at the edge. His room was a mess. Our first point was maybe a man would think of once sorting out his things before dying, but he did not. and it seemed almost as something pushed him onto the edge in the matter of moments. We gathered up enough evidence we could try to leave no trail of us there, and straight away headed to the basement, and there we laid down everything we had on him. Next day, we learned that the case had been declared a suicide, and there was no further investigation that would take place regarding the case. It was even better for us, as we could freely indulge ourselves in it without worrying that the police will get involved. The next step that we did know, according to all the investigation shows that we had seen, is to interrogate people who were closest to him. But there were only few who really knew him up close and personal, and one of them was a bartender in the town. Next up on our plan was interrogating. So we asked the principal that we would like to hold a memorial for him, and it was so we can easily cover up for all the questions we were going to ask about him to people, and so we went in on it. Most people have only good to say about him, since they didn't really know him that good, and everybody called him a good person, stayed quiet. But it was the bartender at the Tulsa bar that had the most information about him. We went on. It wasn't easy getting in the bar, and then we did. At first, the bartender was pretty cautioned and alarmed, but then when he learned that it was about the school memorial, he chatted with us good. He said, he was a good man. Been my partner in the side business we've been running for a while. Well, what you want to know about him, a colorful man, pretty damn good photographer. You should see the pictures he have taken. Well, never mind, said enough already. He smirked and told us to leave as there was nothing more to tell. But as we went out, he stopped my friend and signaled me to keep moving. He came out and I asked. At first he refused to tell me, and as soon as we were away from the perimeter of the bar and in safety of our house, he told me that the bartender invited him to give an expose of everything about Mr. Parkson and how it'd be great for the memorial. So in our suspicion, we decided to move on with the plan. We planned ahead and decided to do it, preparing for the worst. Next day, as the school got over and the evening broke, my friend went on to visit the bartender while I stayed at a distance, investigating and recording. He walked into his room and was greeted, and then they both moved to his living room. Still in sight, there was no reason for worry. As they chatted, he offered my friend some soda pop. He accepted and went on to chat and write things that he was telling. Few moments later, what seemed to be boring conversation turned into horrifying emergency. My friend was suddenly lying unconscious on the sofa, and the bartender seemed to be tying him up. My first immediate response would have been to call the police, but I couldn't just walk away from there. So I waited, and I watched. He picked up my friend and moved on to the basement. He was in a potential danger, and I was the sole witness. So first thing I did was write a note in the letter. It said, I and Donnie are students in Tulsa High, and we are trapped in the house of the bartender from Tulsa Bar. He is holding us without our permission. Call the police. There is something wrong. And I quickly wrapped it over a rock and tossed it through his neighbor's window. And that is when the bartender was alerted, and he quickly came out to check. It is then that I decided to enter the house through the basement and hid behind an almost broken cupboard. I saw Donnie, and he was tied and lying on the floor of the basement, and a small studio was set up there with lights and backdrops. I stayed there as quiet as I can be and watched what was going on. He then opened up a door through basement. It was a secret passageway of a kind. He went on there, and after a while, came back and brought with her a girl. She was naked and was tied in ropes. That was it. It was the trauma that finally scared me. I was scared for the life of my friend, the girl, and mine. Luckily, when he forcefully brought her, he heard a knock, and as he walked out, I walked out of the cupboard and decided to help them. It was the note the neighbors probably found it and called the police, but that wasn't the case. I untied both of them, gave the shirt that I was wearing to the girl, grabbed an envelope of photographs, and decided to run upstairs so he could get caught in action. Assuming that the police was at the door, I hurried up. And as I got up there, was the horrifying straightaway visible on my face. It wasn't the police. It was Mr. Musham, our teacher, standing there staring at me. Boy, you sure bring your nose around everywhere. Grab him. Mr. Musham ordered the bartender, and as he was approaching me, I decided to make a run for it in the basement. As I got down, I saw that Donnie was coming back to his senses, but there was no point. We were trapped. Nowhere to go. We were stuck. And our plan fell apart as it was not the thing that we assumed would happen. He tied us all up and then pushed us to a passageway through basement. As we walked, the darkness hit us, and the bartender said, "You aren't getting a chow for a day now. Sit here and wait for your turn." As I sat there, I realized that it wasn't just 3 there. There were 10 of us in total, all around the same age, minors. I had the evidence in my pocket. There was no way I was letting it go out of my sight. So the first thing I did was dig a hole in the muddy passageway and bury them. And the second thing I did was make a promise that I will save them, as I had already thrown a rock and a note in the neighbor's house. It was then that part of my hope broke when one of the girls said that she lived in that house and that her parents moved away after they couldn't find him. It was an abandoned house. Hopeless, I sat there, and then Donnie got back up to his senses completely and said, "We are not scared of him. All we have to do is think." And there it was. With my friend, the hopes were back. So I devised a plan, and I told them to do whatever the man is saying, and to get him to confess everything that he had done. As for the next few days, he got his obscene photographs of the underage minors. He through small talks disclosed everyone and everything from his partners Mr. Parkinson and Mr. Musham to the murder that he did for Musham that was the killing of Parkson. Not a single day would he drag me out that gave me the time to think even more. And there was the plan that I had made to tackle him. It must have been 7 to 8 days that he had kept us there. We had no idea. We had no idea if anyone was looking for us or not. And then he must have been in a rage that he decided to drag me out of the basement passage. Lights and days hurt my eyes, and I tried to adjust to it. And he brought me out and asked, "Where are the goddamn photographs?" I asked him, "What are you talking about?" He said, "Don't be smug, and tell me where the goddamn photographs." So I told him, if I can get a pizza, I will tell him. At first he refused and started thrashing me, trying to get it out of me, but there was no chance that I was telling him. So he gave up and agreed to the deal. He did not want to take a chance of leaving me alone, so he decided to call in the delivery guy, and that is where I found my chance. But he muffled my voice and pushed me back into the basement. I tried screaming my lungs out as the pizza guy came, and not a single shriek or of our voice reached him. He brought in the pizza and asked for the photographs. Seeing that my plan had failed, I refused to know anything about it, and so he thrashed me. I was near to my death. As I laid at the basement floor, wondering that my death is near, I was broken by the fact that my plan failed. But soon the bartender was called in by the Misham, and as my eyes got closed, I saw him leaving and heard only one thing he said: "Tonight, I kill you." I was lying unconscious on the floor, not knowing what was yet to come. I saw nothing but pitch black darkness, and as I moved through darkness, I finally opened up my eyes, and there I could see the blinding white light over me, and that was my signal of death, I suppose. And it was the darkest back again. I kept drifting from light to dark and dark to light. It felt like eternity, until I got back to the light and found myself lying in the hospital bed, with Donnie sitting right beside me, smiling. I was in no condition to talk to him or to ask him what happened and how it happened. But there was this awareness that I had, and it was that we were safe. And for that reason, I closed my eyes and relaxed. The bartender was killed in crossfiring, Mr. Misham arrested and imprisoned for 2 consecutive life terms. There is no way he's surviving jail. And well, Parkson, he wasn't the good person anymore, and the case was reopened. There were more people involved that I couldn't disclose yet. For that, I will have to get back to the basement. As I recovered in 2 weeks, there was a report that the bartender's house got burnt. Too obvious. Someone was trying to cover their tracks, and they thought that maybe the evidence will burn with it. But that is not the case. I was greeted warmly back into my home. I decided to visit the basement. Donnie was already waiting, and as I entered I said, "There's more to this case. We have to find the way to the basement."
When I was a child, my father owned a little restaurant called Bombshells. My father said that the restaurant had people from all the way from New York, but I knew that they were not for the food, but rather for the girls. His place was the center attraction of the town, and he believed that it was for the food, but I knew it was rather for the girls, and he knew somewhat that it was because of the girls. My friends and I would hang out through our summer break in the same place, and not for the food, but rather for the beautiful server ourselves. We were young guys with raging hormones, and this was the place that set right with all of that. Now, my father ran the place very unconventionally and believed a lot in second chances, so most of the girls that were there were the ones that were hit hard by life, and most of them were rehabilitating from the previous lifestyles that had brought them down to this. My father believed that everybody deserves a second chance, and giving people such is the idea that God would go by, so he naturally went by it. I, on the other hand, was a bit different from my father, and all I did was objectify these women because of the company I was in, and never thought the way my father thought, until I heard the story of Amanda. She was one of the servers in my father's restaurant. My friends and I were hanging around the kitchen a lot, and we all just ever needed an excuse to hang around the girls when my father found out about the things I was doing. He caught me and decided to take me to one of the workers that worked for him in the restaurant. He took me on a Sunday to meet her. We arrived at around 10 a.m. and Megan sat us nice and offered us a drink, and then my father left me there to spend a day with her. I was not sure why I was there. Megan was dressed in her work outfit, and she came an hour before us from the shift. She told me to be comfortable and came closer and told me, "Your father told me about you. I know you boys have these raging urges in this age, and there is something that I can always do that is going to pave two roads for you, the right one and the wrong one. It is on you which one you take." I looked at her, and I was clueless about what she was trying to tell me. I looked at her blank and confused. She then looked at me and took her dress off and was standing blank naked in front of me. And as soon as she did that, I closed my eyes and said, "What the hell are you doing?" She looked at me and she said, "You don't want it?" And I said, repulsing, "No, what the hell is wrong with you?" And then she started sobbing, and I said, "I did not mean it that way." And I just told her to get dressed back, and she did. And now she was crying and apologizing and said that my father told her to do all that. And in that moment, I thought, well, the very image that my father is holding is clearly a ruse. She then went on to tell me that there is a whole prostituting ring that has been working from that place, and it was just so hard to imagine my father as a pimp, and I was pissed at that fact. And moreover, I was annoyed by all the hypocrisy that he was portraying. And she went on to tell me this story. "I was 21 and homeless when your father saw me on the side of the road. I was holding up a sign that said, 'Need food, we'll work for it.' And he saw that and opened up the door for me, and I sat with him. He was very nice and comforted me and brought me whatever food I liked. He asked me if I wanted a place to stay and a job, and I agreed, and that is when he introduced me to this restaurant, became very friendly with me. And I remembered being so charmed with him that in just months I saw myself falling in love with him. And we started this affair. And when I got comfortable with all the comfort that now I could support and a salary to support myself, he then introduced me to his friend. And then another day, another friend who had forced themselves upon me. They were some powerful friends, and I realized what kind of filth I was now trapped in. I was not able to live with myself in the beginning, but now I'm used to it and the money that comes with it. And the luxury that I can afford is somewhat compensating with the fact that I am now a hooker working secretly out of the bombshells. I was shocked and in disgust at first. I refused to believe her. But then she showed me the evidence. She told me that she was saving the evidence just in case she ever has to take the backup route and just wants to exit from the failsafe for everything. And when I saw the evidence for myself, I realized what kind of double standard my father was playing. And it was something that I resented. She told me that there isn't much that she can do and she is scared to do anything anyway. I decided to get the evidence and get it copied just in case if anything was to happen to her. I frequently started hanging out with her a lot. I was 15 and she was 22 at the time. I remember I was deeply in love with her. And somehow my father noticed that we were hanging out a lot lately. And then one day when I was by her place and saw that it was emptied, it was weird. She did say yes to be my prom date that year, and she had gone without saying anything. I decided to confront my father, and he said it was for my good that she is gone. I called her, and there was nothing I did not hear from her in months. But I heard about the servers at restaurant that she was taken care of because she tried to cross my father. I then decided to confront my father one final time and gave him the opportunity to confess and come clean. But instead he tried to hush me and intimidate him. That was his last mistake. All the evidence that he thought he got rid of was actually backed up, and I decided to take it to the authorities. And he was arrested, and the bombshell closed. And then he said, "Do you feel noble getting your father arrested?" I looked at him in the eyes and asked, "Where's Megan?" And he looked at me and said in anger, "I should have choked her way before you met her." I realized what happened to her, and in order to make it right by her, I decided to testify against my father to keep him in there for as long as possible. To this day, I don't regret what I did to him. People assume that the streets of London are quite safe, and that everything around here is grand and robust. But there are shadows that lurk around every corner of the street. The shadows are too scared to admit that they exist. There is the world that is all tea and biscuits, a world that doesn't care about these dark corners. And then there is the world, our world, the world where these corners exist, and our fear exists with them. Usually, we tend to walk away from these roads because we know what danger the path entrails for us. So we walk, avoiding those sideways. But once in a blue moon, travelers from the other side of the posh world walks to this side and lose themselves in corners of the streets they consider dirty. Max was one such traveler. Born rich to a family of royal relatives, Max never saw a single day of discomfort or poverty. Max didn't even know that such a gruesome part existed in London. He was the closest to the throne and a potential future successor, so eventually he was put in a glass jar that he called his own world, and this exposure to reality would end up being too much. Max was brought out to shop in the east corner of a royal shop in Chelsea, and there it was when the car got the breakdown, which was already unusual. Max to get outside to get some air, and as he did, the security got out too. They insisted Max to follow the protocol and get back inside the car, but he refused and walked away from the car. And as he walked away and the guards tried on following him, a large blast exploded within their convoy, and it exploded Max's car that was within the parameter of the explosion. It was total chaos around, and the guard that was supposed to protect Max were now themselves injured and broken. The paramedics came in. There was not a single person in the convoy that was alive, so it was naturally assumed that Max was also dead. For almost 24 hours, there was no news of Max, and the coroners were busy looking into the exploded bodies to find if Max was one of them. There were no clothes, and there was no DNA of Max. But Max never returned, or did he call. Almost 48 hours passed, and no one came forward to have any information about Max. The Secret Service was busy investigating the blast, and the police were busy searching the perimeter to find Max. After 48 hours, the coroners ruled out Max's death. It was evident that Max didn't die in the explosion, but the bigger question they were puzzled with was where he was, if not dead. It was right about the 72-hour mark. They received the first phone call. "A black bag filled with money. Drop it at the post office, or Max here dies." And before the origin of the call could be traced, the phone was disconnected. At first, the call was considered fake, so they decided to ignore it and set up tracers for when they called back. But this time, they called back at the commissioner's home. "Tell your stupid husband we are not fuck-ups. Bring the money, or this inbred dies." The wife called the commissioner about the call. Now it was certain that it wasn't a hoax, and they were linking the kidnapping to IRA. But the accent was Scottish, so there was confusion. They decided to prepare a bag and set it up at the post office and were vigilante every time someone got near to it. After 5 hours, a little boy came closer to it, and they all surrounded him. Then a burner phone in his pocket rang, and the commissioner picked it up. "You think you are very smart. Your smartness just caused your inbred puppy his finger." This was followed by a large shrieking noise from Max, and the family confirmed that it was in fact Max's voice. The family decided not to play games anymore and do as the kidnapper said. And then it came. A personal phone call to the father. "You seem to be a reasonable and rational man. Quietly, and I mean it this time, drop the bag at the subway and walk away. And when you walk by the alley at the McDonald's, you'll find your son. If you do it by the rule, or the body of your son, if you don't do it by the rules, the choices are all yours." The next day, the father decided to follow it exactly the way he was told. And there it was by the alley close to McDonald's. Max, lying in the alley in rugged old clothes. That is when the father brought him home. Police interrogated Max, but he knew nothing about it and said that he was unconscious the whole time and don't know who kidnapped him. There was not a single visible injury on Max, and the commissioner was at first doubtful about the kidnapping, but later on refused to press it further because of the royal matter. The commissioner picked up his phone and called the number from which he received the call, and to everyone's surprise, it was ringing in the room. Everyone looked around to catch a glimpse as to who was it. Turns out, it was in the Prime Minister's pocket. A new conflict brewing in the fancy halls of the royals. When I was asked to be the judge at the famous Shark Tank, I was thrilled by the opportunity. Not just because it was a great platform for young inventors, but also the fact that it would help kickstart incubator programs at a national level. So I allotted a part of my finances to the investment strategy of Shark Tank, making sure that I was not spending a whole lot on there. My first 2 weeks were too easy to handle, and half of my fund was already invested in some brilliant new ideas, and I went on to acquire 2 new innovative startups. It was an amazing platform, and as we moved to the next week of shooting, we got the report of a new defense project that was coming in, and we were pretty excited about it. The shoot was supposed to happen outside the hall this time, and every safety measures were taken. The duo of brothers who made this atomic bomb diffusing robot were pretty sure of their invention and were confident when came in. They wanted $1 million to invest in more research and around $20 million more for mass production and pitching it to the defenses. I was extremely interested in the project, as it would mean involving with the security agencies and the government, and I was planning to leverage this startup to get into good boots with the government, to get some tax deductions to branch out a profit. The presentation started well. The boys were confident, and so was I. And then we moved out for the experimentation phase and went out to test it. One of the boys was the marketing head of it and talked money with us. I countered their offer and told them I will take 30% of their company for $50 million, and I will be responsible for further defense marketing since no one was brave enough to take the shot they accepted. I made the offer before they could even test the device. As the engineer brother went on to set up the experiment, the marketing brother was with us, and it started. They planted the dummy bot and the robot went on to defusing it. And after waiting for a mere 5 seconds, it was greenlit and the dummy bomb was defused. We were very excited to see this, especially I was. To me, that was a great success, and we all were walking toward the engineer brother as he went to grab the robot. And out of nowhere, the moment he grabbed the robot, the bomb went off. In a horrifying surprise, it wasn't a dummy robot. There was a malfunction, and the place was destroyed. The brother somehow made it, but his arms were torn apart, and he cried in pain, and we were all flustered and concerned as we fell where we were standing. In our haze, all we remember was ambulances rushing and police taping the scene, while paramedics dragged us out. We had minor injuries and concussions, but one of the brothers was out cold with his arm amputated. Another was down cold. The episode never aired to avoid bad press, and we all signed NDA until now. Since the recovery is done and everything is back on track, the NDA clause was taken back. And still believing in their vision, I decided to still invest, and they did deliver. And as part of the deal, I went on to finance this project of building robotic arms. He made one for himself, and now we will manufacture robotic arms for those who have lost theirs during an accident or war or were not born with them. We've decided to pay less attention to the robotic of weaponry and more on helping the world with. The dark web is the place of nightmares, where even the darkest of stuff you can imagine can get true. And those things that you dread are the very things that the dark world is made of. There are things on there that can shake your beliefs and things that you cannot forget. It is made up of your worst nightmares collectively, and that is why it is one forbidden place, especially for anyone underage. This is the story of the infamous game Blue Whale, whose roots go much deeper in the dark web, and how it affected the life of several other kids. It was a game that resulted in a lot of children's death, and there were no signs of any foul play until the investigations resulted in links to the dark web. And ever since the case of Blue Whale game, things have gotten pretty serious on the content of dark web. This is the story of Mason, and how he got involved deeply in this dark stuff, and in a way, lost everything in the wake of things. Mason was in high school, and was very much interested in the whole internet things and trends, and wanted to be a part of the latest trend and things, and would go often deeper into the internet, places that shouldn't be played with. And that is how he got himself wrapped around in things like Blue Whale. He was intrigued by the idea of the game, and went into the depths of the dark web to get him involved into the Blue Whale game. This game was nothing short of terrible news, and Mason found himself in the middle of it. Every morning, Mason would wake up, and by the bleep of the message would end up hurting himself in some way or another. It was the drawing of the blue whale that he had to do with the blade on his hand, or certain other tasks that he would do, anything that would harm him. It kept happening for several days over the next few weeks, until the final task was on the hand, the final task of taking life. And one morning, he stood on the roof of his house and jumped. Nobody knew what killed him until his computer was looked for, and then they did not find out all the mysteries and darkness and Mason's involvement in the Blue Whale game. The police circled around all the evidence, but there was no one to blame or no one to point fingers to, no suspect and no leads, and that was the only thing about it. Nobody ever came closer. The game finally faded, but other than getting 3 years in prison, The creator of the game went off easy, while several children around the world suffered and killed themselves because of the game. Hey guys, thanks so much for all the support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so. The internet that we access is mere 10% of the real internet that we don't really access. That 90% of the internet is the dark web. The dark place on the internet that hides everything sinister you can think of. The place is filled with things that you have never witnessed in life. Kidnappers, murderers, hitmen for hire, you name them, and they will have them. And these places and these people are everywhere. They live their lives very normally amongst us. Influenced by all the stories that I have heard about the dark web, I decided to have a look for myself. The first thing I did was buy a laptop, and to safely browse the scorched place of the internet, and to safely do that without being scammed, robbed, and murdered by a stranger. I went on to buy the laptop from Craigslist. The man who I bought the laptop from was himself the most shadiest person I've ever seen. The guy dressed in all black and was really weird during the exchange. The laptops cost me $25, and the guy wanted everything in $1 bills. So the exchange itself was very weird and getting the laptop away from his hands. After getting the laptop, first thing I wanted to do was clear the hard drive. It was filled with viruses and malware that people don't even know of. I switched on the laptop and downloaded Tora before shifting the VPN. Now I was from Namibia, and the moment logged into the Tora, the browser for dark web, there were certain pop-ups that came that were left unnoticed. There was this pop-up for a young lady wanting my attention, and then there was another pop-up for drugs, and many sites that can bring in malwares that can steal data from your system. Your details and everything you hold important can be taken away from you in the blip of a moment, and things are wild in there. So I did not really want to mess with all that. So I just went on to one of the websites on there that shows creepy videos, and to not indulge myself into some of the illegal things, I decided to just surf through the creepy profiles of videos that were labeled haunted. I was scared of a lot of things, and most importantly, I was scared of things that were illegal, unlawful, and could put me into government surveillance. So instead, I just toggled around the creepy videos section, and oh boy, I saw the creepiest, bone-chilling things right on there. One video was of a girl inside a room, and she was being fed limited ration, and then there were intruders that she was trying to get away from, and it seemed like was one of those red rooms that have been talked about and warned about. And then the video broke. To this day, there are thousands of videos and stories that you can find on the internet talking about the dangers of dark web, and the dangerous and sadistic place it is.
On Friday the 13th, 2018, I went on to hop on of the new shopping site that was still in its beta test phase. This was a very new site, and I was just scrolling through the items that looked rather ordinary like every other shopping site. And then there was a small corner on the right side of the screen that said, "Do not enter." And as I saw that, I was persuaded to open it, even more than now. And as I clicked on it, another warning popped up, and this time it said, "There is no turning back from here." And I began the curious cat clicked on the tab. The more you tell me not to do, the more I will do it. I was taken into another window, and what I saw in front of me was quite alarming. There were the windows of people and children with a price attached to them. There was a list of filters that included ages, weight, physical characteristics, gender, and nationality. It was a hidden site of human traffickers, and them displaying their products that were the humans, in skimpy clothes that were almost like not having any clothes. And as I kept on clicking, I lost my senses with everything I was seeing. And then one thing led to another, and in all that pops up tabs, and everything I clicked on a 35-year-old Italian woman. And all I remember it said was, "Your order has been placed." And immediately a payment of $200 was deducted from my account. And as I did, I was a bit relieved, and was just hoping for it to be a mere virus, and it seemed to be like that. I mean, $200 for a human being is way too less anyways. I cleaned my computer and my drives from all the malware, and went back to sleep, weirded out by the bizarre incident. I woke up the morning, checked out my phone, and saw there was a message saying your order is out for delivery. Now I was just angry and went back to the site to cancel it, but there was no pop-up this time. I tried contacting the support staff and they refused to comment on anything and told me that it is probably a malware, and then they later blocked me from using the site. There was definitely something fishy about it. And then in the afternoon, an Italian woman who knew broken English and was wearing skimpy white bridal pieces of cloth knocked on my door, and all she had with her was a piece of newspaper. I had her sit on the couch, and most of it, all I was confused, and then I tried communicating with the woman. She seemed to be drugged a lot. After a while, I fed her, and then took her to the doctor for a checkup. Upon examining, she said she was my wife and I couldn't do anything but agree. I didn't want to involve the police. I took her back home, and then after a day or two of recovery, I started having conversations with her, and she started telling me the story of how she was lured away because of the job and overseas, and ended up with the traffickers, and then she told me how many women, children, and men are victims of this trade. I told her that we should go to the police, but she told me that police were already involved since she had been living in my very same town for about 10 years in the captivity. And she told me about the involvement of police in the matter, since the police was the one who helped cover the docking at the ports. Now Maria was living with me, and it started becoming the new norm, and I went out for grocery shopping one day, and in the market, I saw the tattoo on a guy's hand, and I recalled I had seen it before, I just didn't know where. I went back and realized I had taken a screenshot the night the weird pop-up came to my screen. It was the same tattoo on one of the hand that was seen in the screen. For the next few days, I tried to figure it all out, and then turns out the mayor was involved, and that just rendered me powerless. Next best thing was getting involved with FBI with all the evidence. Maria now became a part of my life, and there were so many people that still needed to be free. Upon meeting and discussing everything, FBI decided to do a sting, and then later on, I had to order another one. But this time, they told me to order a boy instead of a girl to avoid being suspicious. And 2 FBI agents were always planted in my apartment where me and Maria were busy living like a normal couple. And then it happened. The boy, who was just 7 years old and from Japan, was dropped in front of my door. But the man realized that I was the same guy who also ordered Maria, and as I opened the door to let the boy enter, I saw he was pointing a gun at me. But before he could do, the agents grabbed him, and the boy was scared, grabbing me, and Maria was by my side. The whole trafficking gang was caught, and the mayor was linked and prosecuted. They put me, Maria, and the kid in protective custody, and now we live in the unknown suburban as a family. It is me, my wife Maria, and my Japanese son. A weird combination of family, one would expect. We have always been a big fan of pizza here in New York, but we did not like that factory-made bullshit. We liked the fresh-baked Italian pizzas, made in the oven from back in Italy. And every time someone said pizza, we would take them through the trails of all the authentic Italian pizza places we had in the city. There was even an official pizza tour guide that would help you get the best pizza in town, and especially when it was about our little block that was authentic Italian neighborhood, and the culture was really strong in that part, and the food was an important part of the culture, so everyone knew everybody, and every business there was owned by someone you know. It was a tight-knitted community, and we enjoyed all our adventures, gatherings, and the food that was made at these gatherings. And we were not like one of those exclusive communities. We welcomed everybody, and we loved to feed people. And the authentic Italian meal was something everybody would look out for. And it was quite satisfying to watch our neighborhood thrive so much and be better. Us Italians, we believed in 2 things to be the most important. Number 1, family. Family is the most important. And number 2 thing was food. The 2 most important things, the family and the food. We took great pride in both of them, and the rules were pretty simple. Never cross the family and never cross the food. And while someone who did them both, we made sure got the worst of the Italy. Roman was one of the nephew of Modigliani. He was the builder who was responsible for building the new fancy stores in the neighborhood. And because of them, the neighborhood was getting the outside attention,
and attention we didn't really like or cared about. We were an exclusive neighborhood for a reason. We made sure that the culture that we had inherited from our fathers and forefathers must live on. Roman was one of the new kids, and as the new kid, he never understood what it meant to be in that neighborhood and what the sense of community was about. These kids were born into the world of social media and mobile phones. They don't know what it is to connect in person, to feel the way the whole community feels, and their individuality sometimes disguises itself as progress, and people just go with it. We saw the community thrive and build, and these building parks and small establishments were all part of it. They had their stories, and now Roman was the one to sign out the documents to sell Papa Marici, one of the oldest pizza places, to some Atwood guy. It was the end of an era for us. We never thought that we would ever witness such things, but here we are. But we were much cool about it than some of the people in the community, like Rob. Rob went on to Roman's place and threatened him about him selling the place to some hack. Now Rob and his group was one that were most unhappy about the changes, since Papa Marici was the place that they hung out, and when they decided to turn that place into scrap, they were pissed and wanted to really beat Roman. But even after all that, Roman was still family, so all they could do is bicker with him, and nothing more than that. Roman assured everyone that it will be all right, as the Atwood guy is going to open a new and better pizza place. They were a bit relieved that the place isn't going anywhere, and I guess it was about the dynamics of the place that people did not want to miss, so they waited to see what the Atwood guy would bring. Though skeptic, they were waiting patiently to see what it becomes. And as long as the place wasn't transitioned into something that they hated, they were good with Roman. A few weeks later, the news broke, and the things were placed in order, and everybody flipped when they realized that it was a Domino's that was going to open up in the neighborhood. The whole neighborhood was flipping over the fact that the Atwood guy had the audacity to open something like Domino's in a place where there were several authentic pizzerias that had been functioning for decades, and some even lasting for around 100 years. And this just made Rob and the guys lose their minds. Wasn't tearing down the neighborhood enough that they had to open up Domino's in the authentic Italian neighborhood? Rob did not take this nicely and went to plaster Atwood when Roman stopped him. They were about to beat Roman when Roman said he had no idea that the guy would be opening up a Domino's in the neighborhood. And I remember they had an argument about pizza for about an hour until they decided that they will together make sure that Atwood gets pulp beaten out of him. And they went and brought the guy out. They were having a heated argument about the place. Atwood was firm about his decision. He wanted Domino's in there. The argument soon turned ugly, and they started fighting. And then, in the heat of the moment, the Atwood guy took out a gun and shot Roman 3 times. And before he could shoot Rob disarmed the Atwood guy. Roman was taken but to the hospital by Miss Ribisi and his folks in the car, and Atwood was now surrounded by the neighborhood. And I remember the neighborhood was angry and fierce, and they started beating everyone who was related to Atwood in the place. They were lynching him and kicking him while he was down, and his guys were getting beaten at pulp. It was quite possible that they would die with that kind of beating, but I secretly called the police. I did not want the neighborhood to be in peril. And then when the police came, they broke them out. Thankfully, no one got killed, neither Atwood nor his guys, and Roman survived the shots too. There was nothing good that was going to come out of it, but one good thing did come out. It was the Domino's. It wasn't going to open, and the place became a chill community kitchen, and now it serves hot Italian food to people who can't afford it. I go to uni here in Lancaster in the UK, and like most students, I'm out clubbing every weekend that I can afford it. I've had some of the best nights of my life with the girls at Lancaster City Center. But I'm not gonna lie, I've seen some really horrid things too, from girls weeing themselves where they were too drunk, to stand to bar fights where rabid lads were whipping bottles at each other. I think alcohol has the ability to bring out the absolute worst in people, And it was on a night out in Lancaster that one of the scariest things had ever been part of for witness to happen right in front of me. So we're leaving the club on Saturday night, planning on stumbling over the road, the kebab house, to get ourselves some cheesy chips, when we see this girl sitting outside the club, looking absolutely rotten drunk. The poor thing can barely keep her eyes open, and it doesn't look like anyone there is looking after her, which was honestly a little bit concerning. But the kebab place, we ended up sitting down and had these big glass windows that looked out into the street. So from my window seat, I could still keep my eyes on her. Like I might choose the chips and I'm sitting there eating them when I see this lad walk up to her who takes her by the hand and then starts trying to get her to stand up. I was really relieved at first because I thought her boyfriend had showed up to take her home. But the longer I looked, the more I just got this bad feeling in the pit of my stomach. Not only was this girl just refusing to go with this guy when she had every reason to want to get home and out of the cold, but this guy was like looking over her shoulder and looking around like he didn't want people to see what he was doing. You know, making sure the coast was clear or something. It was such an obvious sign of guilt, and I could just tell that something wasn't quite right. Eventually, the guy just pulls the girl up to her feet while she weakly struggles and fails to shake them off. And then, he starts dragging her away from the club and into the middle of the streets. I started alerting my mates to this, and immediately we all get up from the table we're at, grabbing our boxes of chips and heading out into the street to confront the guy. We rush over, intended to give it our best British passive-aggressive "excuse me, do you know her?" when out like nowhere this car rushes up and brakes violently next to the pair of them. But in doing so, one of the front wheels like runs over the girl's foot, and she lets out this kind of dwell in pain. Then as the guy drags her around the side of the car that we're approaching, we see her foot like flopping around in this really unnatural way where her ankle is really obviously broken. The guy then starts to basically bundle the girl into the back of the seat that had at least 3 other guys in it. We only just catch them in time to try to stop it, or asking if he knows her, and asking if the girl if she's alright, insisting he needs to call an ambulance for her right that instant. He starts trying to tell us that everything's okay, and then he knows her and is going to take her to an accident emergency to have her foot looked at. One of my mates asked him what her name is, and he sort of freezes, hesitates, and pulls some random name out of his butt in a way that made it painfully obvious that he didn't know her, before he walked up to her just a few minutes before we started going mad, like telling him we're going to call the police if he doesn't let her go. And this gets the other lads in the car really agitated, who start barking at him to get the girl in the car, which he does almost violently before the car starts to drive away. I'm trying to get the car number plates, while one of my mates is on the phone to the police, but I can't make it out properly. So for one horrible moment, I thought that was it. That something terrible was going to happen to that girl, and we totally just failed to stop it. But I turned around, and my other 2 friends are piling into the Hackney cab screaming, "Get in, Chloe!" Then what followed was legit like a movie made his own, like follow the car, and then we're off was in around Leicester City Centre, following this black Volvo with the lads and the injured girl inside. As we're following it, it's just chaos in the back of the cab. One of my mates is still on the phone to the police telling them what's going on. Another one of my mates is giving the cab driver the lockdown on the situation. All the while, I'm noting the fact that the lads don't seem to be driving anywhere near the local A&E. They're actually headed out to the city center towards the suburbs, which to me was a pretty good indicator that we're trying to take her somewhere dark and secluded to do God knows what to her. My mate got off the phone with the police and told us that they told her that they had a unit in the area and they weren't messing about either. It was like a minute or 2 before we saw blue flashing lights and the cab driver pulled his cab back away from the Volvo to let police slip into pulling them over. When they finally do pull over, we all pile out of the cab while the driver waits for us, watching what was going on and shouting over and over, "Liar, liar," when the guy starts telling the policeman that the girl is their friend and that they're taking her home. The other policeman who was there then comes over to us and starts getting our side of the story, which basically involves me telling him everything I had seen. And now I said it was something suspicious. What happened next all unfolded over the course of like an hour, with more police cars turning up to keep an eye on the lads, while one set of policemen got the girl out of the car and drove her to the hospital. I'm not sure if the lads got arrested or not, but I know they got their details taken down, and no matter what happened after that, I know the girl ended up being taken away from the obvious danger in getting her foot seen too. My only real concern then was that the cab driver was going to charge us like an arm and a leg for keeping him occupied for so long. They actually refused to take any money off of us in the end, saying it was just nice to see some people doing some good in the world. And then, when his daughter's our age and gets into any trouble, that he'd hope there'd be some good Samaritans like us to help her out. For the longest time, me and my friend lived next door to these absolutely insane people that made our lives a complete living hell for like an entire year. They were pretty well behaved for the first few months after they moved in, but after a while, they started absolutely blasting music in the middle of the night. I'm not just talking about the gentle kind of bass thump that passively is annoying. I'm talking the kind of loud where you couldn't get a wink of sleep. The police had to be called out a few times to get them to turn it down, and even then, they confessed that they couldn't really do anything other than issue fines. And they got progressively worse though. And it turned out half the reason the music was so loud was to match the sound of the mom and dad having these legit fist fights in the middle of the night. It wasn't even a case of it being a one-sided domestic abuse either. The dad sometimes had worse black eyes than the mom, and scratches all down his face where she'd probably close them to death. They used to knock the 7 shades out of each other, but we didn't think they were too dangerous to anyone outside their own family. Once or twice my dad have gotten into confrontations with them about smell coming from their backyard, or the fact that they used to blast music. The dad of this insane family had threatened to kill my dad once or twice, but none of us actually thought he would go through with it, and thank God they didn't. Then for some reason, it went really quiet over there for a few weeks, and it got to the point we thought that it actually moved. Only they hadn't moved at all. They were just keeping their heads down because they straight up killed their own daughter. Apparently, she tried to run away from home and ended up in a shelter somewhere. They tracked her down, dragged her into the car one night, taking her somewhere secluded, and then beat her to death. I'm not sure they even meant to kill her. They just beat her up so bad that she ended up dying not long after that. That's why they had been so quiet. They didn't want to bring down any attention on themselves when they were dealing with disposing of her body. We had police basically camped out on our street for like weeks after they'd been arrested, all kinds of forensic vans, with people in those full-bodied white fabric suits going in and out all hours of the day. They were obviously looking for traces of the girl, but whether or not they found anything, I'm not really sure. I do know it was in the paper though, and like I said, I thank God the guy never did anything to my dad, because he did actually go on to murder somebody, his own daughter at that.
Before I start telling this story, I have to say that this happened over 3.5 years ago, when I was between the ages of 15 and 18. All the people in the story have been changed for privacy reasons. I grew up in a pretty good-sized town, high school grades always between 800 and 1,000 students. The town was about 45 minutes to an hour from the second biggest city in the state, which is known for 3 rivers and many bridges. I have 2 older brothers, which means, obviously, I'm the youngest of 3 boys. Our mother was the general manager of my grandpa's golf course. By no means were we well off in any way, but we were far from poor, and our father was in the state police lieutenant at the time of everything happening. Cop Dad was hard on us when needed, but we all 3 learned to always be respectful, no matter what, unless extreme situations call for it. I will say that due to a very dark history, I've never had a close relationship with all of my brothers or parents. Even with all of that, I'll admit this made my dad and I slightly close even for very short periods of time, and that we only had one thing in common, that we protect the ones we love at all costs, even if it meant our lives.
him with my mom and family, and I with my girlfriend and nieces and nephew. When I was 15, I went to the downtown area to get food and ice cream with friends at a place about half a mile from our high school football stadium. Being that we were only 15 years old, going into our 10th grade year of high school and almost 16, we all rode our bikes to meet up. My hometown was split up into 6 wards. The restaurant was 1 to 2 miles away, and I lived in the first ward. And we came back outside to leave to do something else. I realized that my bike was missing. As soon as the group and I checked the immediate area, called my dad knowing that he was home from work, and he flew down to where I was. We all figured that he'd be livid at us, which he wasn't at all. All of my friends got on their bikes to go off in different directions towards their home to look for the bike. As my dad and I were driving towards the part of town we lived in, we saw a group of 3, 2 males, 1 female, walking down the side street toward the streets. We were on 1.5 miles from the restaurant, and the group was pushing my bike as they walked, causing me to snap to attention and say loudly, "They have my bike!" My dad stopped immediately and put the car in park in the street. We jumped out, and I laughed inside due to seeing my dad go from usual to cocked at all. He had the girl and one guy stand at the wall with their faces touching it, and he slammed the guy with the bike to the ground. I grabbed the bike and put in the bed of the truck. Since it was only 2 of us against 3, my dad told me to get in the truck so they don't see your face, and I said screw that. And it wasn't until years later that I came to regret that the cops came and arrested all 3 of them. Now fast forward 2.5 years later. I was 18 years old and home from my freshman year of college, which was spent at a military college across the state from home. Which stuff I learned during my time at school will help out. I was out jogging at around 6 p.m. One night on the sidewalk next to the road when a car flew past me, sat at the stop sign until I passed them. Luckily I was close to home and memorized the car's details, or as much as I could. The vehicle drove and went a lot slower than I walked into the house when they were passing. I didn't think anything was wrong with the situation, other than someone driving fast and slowing down upon realizing someone was jogging. Fast forward 1 week, and I just finished up another jog, walked into the house through the front door, which leads right into the kitchen, which has a big window that looks out to the driveway front yard, the street, and stop sign. As soon as I walk through the sink by the window to splash some cold water on my face, I hear a loud boom from outside, sounding Luke Mate exploding, then 1 second of silence, then 3 loud booms, and quick succession, which thanks to being a hunter, I knew was gunfire. I dropped down, crawled to the door, grabbed the baseball bat my brother and I used before, and ran out the door. Even though I knew a bat had 0 chances of winning against a firearm, but I was hoping that I'd surprise them. When I got outside, they were driving away, and I recognized the vehicle from a week earlier that sat at the stop sign when I was out jogging. Thankfully, no one was at home at the time, since who knows where they'd been standing or what would happen. After the police came, I gave my statement, and we waited. Since the town was big for a town, it was also small enough that a lot of people knew everyone. The town's police and my brothers all joked with me, asking things like, "Did you try being a hero when no one was around?" Or would ask if I was crazy due to running outside towards gunfire without a gun. What 2 or 3 days had passed when we had received the call from the cops saying that they had caught the guy who shot the house. As it turns out, it was the same guy who stole my bike 2.5 years earlier. After finding that out, my dad and I looked at each other without saying anything. We didn't tell my mom about it being the same guy, and that he had seen me finish up and walk into the house. Luckily by chance, the guy had received 10 years for attempted murder with a weapon, attempted assault, but due to not a single person being injured in any way, no assault charges of any kind were charged towards him. So we went on with our lives, and I became an EMT during college, working on weekends and finished school. When I was 26 years old, I had stopped by my parents' house when I was in the area. I walked into the kitchen, and on the kitchen table was the town's newspaper, which the front page read something along the lines of "Local woman missing, vehicle found abandoned and burned." As I started reading the article for a second, I almost immediately ripped the kitchen table off the frame with rage. The article said the missing woman's boyfriend for some period of the time was the same guy who had stolen my bike and shot at my parents' house with me in the front window. He wasn't arrested or charged with any crime related to the missing woman at the time. I left and went back to my apartment in our way and made sure I was always carrying a pistol, except when I was working on the ambulance. Even through all of the rage that I was feeling, somewhat paranoid thoughts entered my mind. Maybe about him following me. Even if it was still unlikely. My parents left their house for a week to stay at my grandparents' house, which was empty due to him living at the golf course. Life went on from there. I still work as an EMT in the second biggest city in my state. The guy who shot at my house is currently in prison on charges of crimes not related to the murder of the lady in my hometown. There was a point a couple years back where I decided that discovering Airbnb was the best thing that ever happened to me. And the weirdest thing was that the whole thing had blossomed from one of the worst things that ever happened to me. I've known friends and colleagues that have lost a parent and just sort of took it on the chin. Their death came in an advanced age or after a long illness. It was something that they could accept. But when I lost my dad out of the blue in 2017, it hit me really hard. He was fit and healthy. You're a really careful sort of bloke. And I doubt anyone could say the same for the drunk driver that plowed into him that Thursday evening. The only thing that was supposed to cushion the blow were the savings and life insurance payouts that the family got. I mean, it was a lot of money. Dad must have been squirreling away for years, enough to pay for my little sister to go traveling for what turned out to be a heck of a long time. But I didn't want the money. I just wanted my dad back. I had to wait for the grief to subside before I could decide what to do with it. And instead of just splurging it away, I decided to make an investment. It was around that time that a friend mentioned Airbnb and how an uncle of hers was making a killing from renting out a flat they owned in the city center. It was a bit daunting spending that amount of money, but I took the plunge. Then, after refurbishing the flats and posting an advert on Airbnb, I had my first booking within a week. The income was unreal. Within 6 months, I'd made half the money back, so I invested another place a year, and I was flushed with cash. And even though I kept my full-time job, it got to a point where I didn't actually have to work anymore. Cue fancy holidays, a huge car upgrade. Life was good. Then boom, COVID hits, and my Airbnb income completely dried up. Remember when we all thought COVID will be over in a few weeks or months? What sweet summer children we were, and I was no different. I had no idea it gets so bad that I have to straight up rent one of the flats to be able to keep up my lifestyle. But luckily, it was a seller's market. You wouldn't think that'd be the case during pandemic, but it suited me just fine. I was inundated with applications for one of the flats. I mean, I got literally hundreds of people applying on that open rent website. Finding the right tenant was a lot more work than I thought it would be. Interviewing all the various applicants was a pain. There was some right weirdos applying for the tenancy, and the more I dwelled over who to choose, the more money I was losing. But then one morning, I wake up to an email for a prospective tenant, telling me they'd be willing to pay $350 extra in rent every month, but that they'd have to move in by the end of the week. They didn't even want a viewing. They were happy enough to move in based on the photos I posted online. 350 quid extra was 50% over the odds, and way too good for an offer for me to turn down when I gave the bloke a ring. They seemed normal enough. It was pretty much done deal. All I had to do was hand them the keys. But when I actually met the bloke last December to do a masked up sanitizer-soaked socially distant key handover, it seemed anything but normal. I'm all for wearing masks and stuff, don't get me wrong. I think we should be doing all we can to defeat this. But this guy was completely covered from head to toe. Black Gator Rover's face hat on, had pulled over gloves, the works. I had absolutely no idea who I was handing the keys to really, just that they identified themselves as Stefan, in the same name as the account they contacted me. He barely spoke, and the whole interaction gave me a bad feeling. So I tell him I'll come by in a couple of days to see how he was doing. He had already paid me 2 months' rent on top of a security deposit, so that was basically stuck with him for the time being. I was starting to think my desperation for cash was about to get me in a lot of trouble. About a week later, I gave Stefan a ring to make sure he's settled in all right. I have to call him like 6 times before he answers, and when he finally does, he seems in no mood to talk, but he still somewhat reluctantly agrees to let me stop by. I start worrying about what sort of state the flat is going to be in, but little did I know that I wouldn't be seeing it at all. He refused to open the door to me, citing social distancing and stuff which I understand and respect, but there are ways to conduct a flat inspection without violating the whole 6-foot rule. I insist he refuses. I insist some more. He refuses some more. By the time it got to him threatening to call the police, any potentially good relationship we might have had goes right out the window. Right when he says that I would my mask down to make myself heard more clearly, and I catch this horrendous smell in the air, when it's so bad that it actually silences me for a moment. I find myself putting my mask right over my mouth and nose, and the argument with Stefan trundles along with him agreeing to send me a video of the flat's current condition. The conversation ends, but I hang around for a minute to try to work out where the horrible smell is coming from. It seemed to permeate the entire corridor, like it was almost impossible to work out its exact source. And with it being so intense, nor did I want to, I just prayed it wasn't coming from the apartment. I just rented out. As you can imagine, I'm quite annoyed at that point, and as I walk back across the street toward my car, I turn back to have a look at the window of the apartment. Now my eyes are terrible, but I could suddenly see that this Stefan character and all the curtains closed, but had opted to hang a weird kind of mask in the window. I think it was a papier-mâché or something, and it must have been really old because it looked all shriveled, with long, wiry black hairs framing this pretty creepy-looking face. I remember letting out an audible sigh like, Christ almighty, this is going to get so much worse before it gets better. And suddenly, the mask just disappears back into the curtains. It wasn't just some creepy old piece of decor. Someone had been wearing it and watching me while they were doing so. Stefan then sends me a video of the flat, which looked fine. Only there were one corner of the living room that he apparently refused to show me. I pressed him on it. He pretended not to know what I was talking about, and I decided to quit while I was ahead. It took a week before I started getting complaints. Other tenants in the building who must have gotten my number from the management company started calling me up to complain about the noise and the smell coming from flat 20, the one I own. And then after a while, the calls stopped being complaints and started more like warnings. Warnings about the things they'd heard coming from Steven's flat, and now the smell had gotten considerably worse. But still, Stefan refused any kind of formal flat inspection, and he still does even now. I drove past the flat about 2 weeks ago now. One evening when I was driving home from work, I'd had a late one at the office, so it was about 9 at night when I decided to take a little detour to check out the flat. I was met with almost immediate regret. Apparently, Stefan only uses red bulbs to light the flat after dark, and I'm staring up at the windows like, what's his freak up to now? When I see 2 people like running or jumping around the living room, completely naked by the looks of things. He's obviously not the only one living there now, despite there only being his name on the lease. I suppose this isn't even really a story because it doesn't have an end yet. I've already decided that I'm not going to renew Stefan's lease, that the flat that when his 2 months are up. I'll ask him to leave, or else get the authorities involved. Well, that's about the only thing I'm certain of right now. I have no idea what he's doing in my bloody property. What's making that bad smell, or who the other person is? Things have gotten pretty bad at this point, as I knew they would. But I have a really grim gut feeling that they can get infinitely worse than getting Stefan out of the flat is going to be much more trouble than I ever imagined it would. It's not even worth the money anymore. No amount of money is worth finding out what he's done something awful in there. I'll try to keep you guys updated in the future if I'm still in a fit state to do so, because God only knows what untold horrors await for me in that flat. And God knows what Stefan will resort to in his efforts to keep me and everyone else from finding out. Wish me luck, guys. Things are definitely about to get weird. I moved a lot growing up. By the time freshman year of high school came around, I had moved 7 or so times and was about a year and a half into my most recent move. I had found a pretty close group of friends in middle school, and we all went to high school together. I met him through one of those close friends. They were in a band together, and even though he was almost 4 years older than us, we welcomed him into our group. Sam was easily twice my size, tall and heavyset, and originally kind of intimidating. Although I was never afraid of large men before him. Lesson learned. I had a kind of band home life, and I spent as much time as I could at school, sometimes hanging around the school campus until about 6 or 7 at night with this friend group. 3 of us lived in the same direction, and we would walk the half-hour trip together until our paths split. On slightly colder evenings, Sam offered to walk me home, since the others had gone home already. I just thought he was being a gentleman. He mentioned something from a previous move when he lived in California. He didn't walk a friend home and something horrible happened. He left it at that, and I let him walk me home. We got a lot closer after that. We bonded over both living in California and exchanged numbers. He would message me late into the night about his depression and self-harm, and I just wanted to help. A few months later, he tried to ask me out. It was this big romantic gesture. He learned a Disney song on the ukulele and sang it to me in the cafeteria, but I was already dating someone, then I turned him down. He got angry, a freaky, quiet, twitchy kind of angry. I felt so bad I started seeing him everywhere. We were still friends, we would still hang out in groups, but I would pass him on the street walking somewhere, and a few minutes later, I'd see and he'd change directions and he started to follow me. He would walk me to class by following me in passing periods at a distance. I started to minimize the group time we spent together, and he would follow me more. I had friends meet me at each class and walk me to the next one because I felt unsafe, and he knew where I lived. And then he started to talk to me, but 2 mutual friends, about the one girl in California who had tried to walk home. At first he just shared my name, some crazy coincidence. Then she had the same brown curly hair and blue eyes, and every time he rambled about her, she became more and more like me. And then he said what happened. Over a literal week, this fantasy evolved. They were walking home and they were jumped by some guy with a knife. It was a robbery gone wrong with her birthday, January 24th. My birthday as well, and she did horrible and couldn't react in time. She bled out in his arms. Sarah, who had brown curly hair, blue eyes, my name, my birthday, and sounds just like me, bled out of his arms. Each retelling added more and more detail, and this guy with a sick fantasy about my death would follow me around and knew where I lived. My boyfriend was abusive mentally and physically, but I stayed as close to him as I could whenever I could, because if the worst happened, I knew for sure that he could throw a punch. I never felt safe at school or in our little town walking home from school and at dark. One day at school, he had a breakdown, freaked out, and ran out of the school in a panic. I was sent after him and I found him curled up on the floor. I got closer. I knew about his anxiety and depression, and my safety aside, I wanted to make sure that it was okay. It was then that he told me this horrifying story that I had been hearing from mutual friends with the added details. We had been walking home from a concert in California. We passed a dark alley and a homeless man came out with a rusty knife and asked for anything valuable. I fumbled for my phone. I didn't have anything else on me, and he thought it was calling the cops. He stabbed me once, twice again, and Sam stood there horrified. He saw red and grabbed a broken glass bottle near my body and attacked the homeless man. He killed him with his own knife. He told me he killed someone. My stalker killed someone. It didn't matter how messed up he wasn't anymore. I didn't care if it was a fantasy or real. I didn't care how to affect his mental health anymore. I wanted to go to the police. I was scared for my life. My friends convinced me to go to the school counselor first, and that morning we went and told them everything. The stalker stories, how we admitted to murder, and that was the reason I moved from California. I was afraid for my life and wanted to call the police. The counselor didn't take us seriously though. She went to the principal, and the principal, not a mental health expert, called Sam and to talk about the accusations. The principal then informed me that he didn't think that Sam had any kind of mental illness or that I was in danger. And that was when I lost faith, and adults gave up on going to the police. I stayed with my friend walking me between class, hiding behind my abusive boyfriend and looking behind me every step of the walk home that year. The counselors ended up gaslighting us to the point where this all feels like a fever dream now, and I would think it's made up if it weren't for my journal entries recording the events, and I grew panic and the similar stories from my friend group. I'm a 16-year-old female working as a customer care manager of front of house for McDonald's. Now, where I am from, when you are front of the house, you are required to wear a light strip top, a yellow neck scarf, and a pencil skirt just below the knee, which has a small split up the back. I always buttoned my shirt right up to the top, so I always looked very modest, and I would never say a McDonald's uniform is attractive. Anyway, when I worked at McDonald's, I always put my all into everything I did. So I knew tills, drive-through, drinks, serving, etc. I have also always been someone that will happily have a conversation with someone to make the experience more enjoyable, and hopefully make them want to come back. I was working on tills when the creeper came through the door. He was a tall blonde bodybuilder, at least 50. Though he came to the till and order didn't look very happy. So I asked the obvious question, "How was your day?" etc. He made small talk and we got chatting about both of our dates. After that, he tells me it's nice to see someone smile around here. Everyone else is grumpy. Nice enough compliment. I was used to it. He was right. Not many people here enjoyed this job. He starts coming in once a week on a Wednesday morning. Each morning he would come in, he would have a chat. If I was on the floor front of house, we would sit and chat at a table. And my managers were fine with this, as I knew it made each customer experience unique. We got to know each other's names. His name was Michael. I started college on a Wednesday and Thursday and worked at McDonald's part-time, so my shifts changed. I worked Mondays, Tuesdays, and Saturdays instead of Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays, and Saturdays. And sometimes extra days if you need me. Michael started coming in Mondays every day to find when I was working. First red flag. But I figured he's just lonely and needs someone to talk to. Anyway, he worked out my shift pattern and came in on Tuesday instead after asking me why I wasn't on Wednesday, because he missed out chats. He'd do this thing where he'd let someone else go in front of him, if it meant that he could come to my till instead. He would wait to one side to get served by me. Odd, but I didn't think too much of it. Just thought he was a man that likes to be served by someone with a smile and had taken a liking to me. Again, we chatted when he came in. And this is where it got a bit more weird. We were sat down talking, and he decided to really open up to me. He told me how him and his wife were going through a messy divorce. He started going into the detail of why he had to punch his son. Now this guy was big, like he looked like a bodybuilder. I can't remember exactly what had happened, but he had ended up smacking his wife too, I think. And here he was telling me about it. I'm no counselor after all, after proceeding to tell me how big his house was. Probably to try to grip my attention. He started telling me how he was living in the basement of the house that he owned, and it wasn't fair. I'm going to hit her again if this carries on. Apparently the wife and son wanted him out, and they were going to have it and not pay him for blah blah blah. He wasn't letting that happen. His son went talk to him. Blah blah blah. He started asking me for advice. a 16-year-old girl. I don't really know what to say, so I just sort of said, "Everything happens for a reason, I suppose." And as I went to get up, he asked me to sit back down. Now, I had already been sat down for nearly half an hour, and I know that I said my managers don't mind, but that's pushing it a little bit. So I told him I really had to go. He carried on trying to get me to stick back down, but let me go in the end. Now, this may seem totally unrelated, but trust me, it'll make sense later on. In McDonald's, you have the sauce pumps, right? Well, they're connected to a big bag of sauce which has a pop-up in the front of it. You basically pop the tube into the popper on the bag, but this thing is fiddly. It can take me about 10 minutes just to get it connected. Then to put the new bag in and hold on the side is another 5 minutes. It's a nightmare. Right back to the story. The sauce had run out, and I had to fiddle about getting it where the sauce dispenser is right opposite from where Michael always sits. I could feel eyes burning into the back as I did this, and anytime I turned around, he would be looking at me and just smile. It made me feel a fair bit uncomfortable, but hey, it's my job. And you deal with this stuff all the time. Trust me, he's not the first person. I've had perving on my bum. He came back a few more times, and each time I felt more and more uneasy. He started being a bit more personal, telling me he thought I was a pretty young girl, and we should meet up for coffee at some point, and I politely declined. Michael then said, "Can I ask you something personal?" "Depends what it is." "I can't promise I'll answer." "Are you a virgin?" "I'm not answering that." "What size are your boobs?" "I have a boyfriend and I'm not comfy answering these questions." "Do you love your boyfriend?" "Would you leave your boyfriend for me?" "My boyfriend's behind the counter. I don't think he will be very happy with you asking me questions like that. Just make sure he treats you right. You are a lovely girl. Anyway, I won't be coming back here for a while, so can I have your number?" I don't think my boyfriend would be happy with that either. After that, I go to the back room to calm myself as this was very unnerving for me. He was an older guy being very strange and asking super inappropriate questions of me. He knew my age, as I had told him previously. The day continues. He had left. I finished and went on. When I woke up the next morning, I had a message on WhatsApp, a message on Facebook, and a friend request on there, and an Instagram follow. It was Michael. I don't know how, but he had found all my personal accounts just through my first name. The only way I can think of him finding out is by asking a colleague what my surname is and getting my number off one of them. Maybe he was friendly with one of the other workers and got my number from them. I don't know. He had messaged me saying how he needed to see more of my pictures. My Facebook and insert set the private, but he saw the main pictures of them and my WhatsApp photo. He had sent another message about how he loved looking at my ass when I was bent over crawling on the floor to fix the sauce bags. I don't know if the split in my skirt was revealing, but I don't think it was saying all these things he would love to do to me. At that point, I knocked out and blocked him on everything. I still get messages, not sexual though, from other accounts he has made, wishing me a Merry Christmas, etc. Even though he should have gotten the gist of me not wanting to talk to him. Luckily for me, I moved away a week or so after that happened. So Michael, let's not meet again.
My wife and I travel often city to city, and at one point we settled down in Vegas for a few months. There was one night we were arguing after work, headed towards Henderson, a city outside of Vegas. Lots of isolated streets out of the way. I was sitting reclined back in the passenger seat when we ran over something and the tire definitely popped. My wife got out to check and confirmed it. Within seconds, a woman in a very nice car pulls up behind us. I saw she was a woman and I lay back in the seat, still mad, still stubborn, and figuring she was just checking on my wife, assuming she was alone. The woman said she had a brother-in-law with a tow truck, and he could definitely tow the car free of charge to a shop. My wife asked why she was being so kind, and she said something like, "Us sisters gotta stick together. I'm helping you out." She then got back in the car, and my wife told me that she was going to follow us with her hazards on this empty and dark parking lot in front of some grocery store nearby to get us out of the road. I still didn't think it was weird at all. My wife was very confident this woman was genuine and really wanted to help. So we pulled into the parking lot and my wife got out. I'm still laying back. This woman doesn't even know I'm here yet. She starts talking to my wife about how she changed her life within a year. She could put her on to what she does. It seemed believable. She looked very nice and her car was definitely expensive. My wife keeps insisting she can just call a tow truck. She felt bad she was taking time from her and we could afford it. The woman kept insisting her brother-in-law was coming and to be patient, he really doesn't mind. She even offered at some point to drive my wife around the area looking for a shop that was open. But my wife had already Googled some places. She told her that's smart and they kept talking. No suspicion, honestly. She then starts asking my wife why she's in Vegas. We had New York plates. She says for adventure and doing something new, blah, blah, blah. The woman asked if she has family she's close to or a boyfriend, and she could introduce her to some friends to help her get well acquainted or whatever. She motions over to me and says, "Well, I have a husband," and the woman looked like a deer in the headlights. I politely waved. She leans over and finally sees me, stares for a few seconds, and immediately gets in her car. Instantly. I never saw someone look at me like that. Like she had to get away from me. She tells my wife she has to go to a store that's opening soon. Her brother-in-law is taking too long, but he will be there in an hour at least. She told her not to leave. He'll come help. 1 hour. Okay, honey. My wife was confused and tried to ask her if she'd be there too, but the woman just drove off. We knew then that something was wrong with that situation. We both just stared at each other in confusion. I have no idea still of why that happened. We called the towing company and fixed the car within 40 minutes. Drove back to wait because my wife was persistent in believing the woman was going to come back or her brother-in-law would, and she would have to let them know that she didn't need their help. I told her, I don't think they're coming back, but we did wait. No one came for nearly 2 hours before we drove home. I did some research and found out a lot of traffickers use women because they seem more trustworthy. Vegas obviously has a large presence of these things as well. The woman was almost desperate to keep my wife there. It was all so weird. Now when I look back, it seems more obvious that there was danger there. But in the moment, the woman was so charming and endearing that it seemed like she was genuinely trying to help. I still don't know, but I'm pretty sure she ran off because I was there, and she didn't anticipate a man to actually be there.
A couple of years ago, me and my boyfriend were looking at this budget Airbnb for a weekend in Berlin. It wasn't the nicest place we'd seen, but to us, it was just going to be a place to get some sleep in between hours of exploring Berlin. We'd hardly be there, basically. So we figured we'd go for it. When it comes to pay for the rental stuff, there's a problem with my boyfriend's card details. So we decide to use mine. And there's a problem with my card details too. So we try using PayPal. That doesn't work either. And we can't work out what's going on because we definitely had the money in our accounts. That must be a problem with Airbnb payments, services, or something. But tell that to the owners, who ended up getting really annoyed with us because we'd already basically agreed to rent the place via verbal agreement. By the time we got our bank stuff sorted, turned out it was fraud on both our accounts. They weren't interested in renting to us anymore, so we missed out. Or so we thought. Ages and ages later, my boyfriend sent me a link to an article from a German newspaper telling me to get it up on my iPad, so I could use Chrome to translate it. But before I actually used the translate feature, I scrolled through the whole article. Like, why did he send this to me for? And lo and behold, there's a picture of the Airbnb we wanted to rent. Only then did I translate the text. So it was only after that I read the two parents and their young baby had died in a carbon monoxide leak that occurred overnight in the bloody Airbnb we were going to stay in. I'm not religious or anything, never have been. But I kinda get what people are talking about now when they mention guardian angels or whatever. If it hadn't been for that annoying fraud, we would have rented that flat. And it might have been us that were there when the gas leak happened. It was just absolutely horrifying when I read through the story, and I was crying like a baby by the end of it. It said the owner had been arrested over it, and he was going to be charged with some variant of manslaughter or whatever. And rightfully so. If he had asked me, I still get chills when I think about it though. And obviously, we just stick to hotels these days. Not that they're any safer, but it just makes me feel safer, you know? Because when I picture that poor family who went to bed one night and never woke up again, all because some cowboy landlord was too cheap to service the flat, it doesn't bear thinking about it. To give some context, every summer I would do some temp work for the company where my dad worked. It was an education company, so they always needed temp workers around in July and August time for all of the exam remarks that they had come in. It was my data entry work, but it suited me fine, and that meant I could earn a little extra cash while I was at university. I did this every summer from when I was 19 through when I was 23, and then I got another job at the same company for a bit after I graduated, but we'll get to that later. For now, all you need to know is that I was a reasonably familiar face there, and everybody knew I was my dad's daughter. The main downside of working there was that I'd clock off work at 5 p.m., but I'd have to wait for my dad to finish work since he was the head of an entire department, so he'd end up staying a bit later. Every day I bring a book with me and sit in this little foyer area between his department and the department where I worked, since it had the most comfortable chairs. I must have been 22 years old when this happened, because it was the penultimate summer that I worked there. I had just had my hair cut short for the first time in my life, and I'd had it dyed red as well. I was sitting on these couches reading, when all of a sudden, this guy approaches me. Leon. Leon tells me that he works in my dad's department, and he thought he'd come introduce himself. This is a pretty common occurrence for me, and I was aware of this guy. He was young and decent looking, so a few of the women in my department had a crush on him. I was dating someone at the time though, and I'd never actually seen him in person, but I could see what they saw in him. He got to chatting, and he mentioned that I changed my hair, so I told him about cutting it short, and he cut me off mid-sentence. As this is where it started to get weird. He said, no, first it was brown and you didn't have a fringe, and then you went through that phase of curling it. Then you put the fringe in its indicted red. After that, you dyed it purple, and now you had to cut short and dye it back to red. This guy I just met was describing over 2 years worth of hairstyle changes that I'd had. I felt creeped out, but it seemed like a nice enough guy. And I guess I'd worked at the company throughout the entire time, so it was reasonable to assume that he'd noticed me before, and that should have been the first red flag. He asked me if I had Facebook, and I told him that I did, so he said that he would add me. That seemed pretty normal. But then, after he'd sent the friend request, he asked me to get my phone out so he could watch me accept the friend request. I'm British, and it's therefore impossible for me to be impolite. So I got my phone out and showed him that I had accepted it. I thought that might calm him down. Bear in mind, he wasn't a bad-looking guy, so I felt a bit flattered at this point that he was so keen on me. Then, sense of flattery dissolved real fast. After the Facebook thing, he kept asking me if I had MSN, and I told him that I didn't. I swear throughout this conversation, he asked me if I had MSN about 4 times. Then the final time, he was like, please, can you get MSN Messenger so we can chat after work? It was like he had something really urgent he wanted to tell me, but I'd only just met this person. I kinda laughed and said how I hadn't used MSN since I was a teenager without necessarily rejecting him. Then he said something like, well, If you don't have MSN, then you have Skype. This seemed like the perfect opportunity to bring up my boyfriend, who was a foreign student and went back to his home country during the summer. He was the only person I spoke to on Skype. I said to Leon how I didn't have my own Skype account, but I used my dad's Skype account to talk to my boyfriend. I really thought this might ward them off. I was wrong. Without missing a beat, he said, "Can you please just get your own Skype account so we can video chat after work?" He said it like I somehow was inconveniencing him, like this was something we'd agreed to do months ago or something. I had no idea how to react, so I just sort of smiled and laughed. Thank the heavens someone from my dad's department walked past at the moment, was like, "Leon, are you meant to be at your desk?" He scurried off pretty quickly after that, but not before reminding me to get my own Skype account and sent him the details. I told my dad about the whole exchange in the car ride home, but all he said was that Leon was very friendly and that a lot of women in his department liked him. So maybe I just misunderstood the situation. I thought he was probably right, so I tried not to let it bother me. Later that evening, however, I was on my computer doing university work when a message popped up on my face. Look, it was Leon on the message. Said was, "We like the same movies." I don't know what it was, but something about this message freaked me out so much, I decided not to respond and logged off Facebook, hoping that he would notice I had been online. The next day after work, I was sat in my usual spot when Leon comes over to me. His face was like thunder. At first, I thought he was having a bad day and was walking through the hallway, but my heart dropped when I realized he was walking directly towards me. "Why don't you respond to your Facebook message?" I was stunned. How was I supposed to respond to that? Who says stuff like that in real life? Lucky for me, I didn't have an opportunity to respond because he started off on this tirade. I'm not even kidding. He started listing all of the movies we had in common, and then he had seen on my Facebook profile Batman, The Dark Knight, Watchmen, Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, Fight Club. I just sat there watching him reel off all of these film titles. Once he was finished, all he said was, "It's okay, I forgive you," and then walked off back to his department. Over the next couple of weeks, he came and found me in my spot every day and talked to me, from the moment I sat down to the moment my dad came to get me. I don't remember many of the exchanges, but I do remember distinctly one day pretending to pick up my nose when I saw him coming to see if it would pull him off. It didn't. I got to the point where I'd get so stressed out after work that I'd go and hide in the toilets for as long as I could, but the women I worked with started to notice and think I was weird. Eventually, I broached the subject with my dad, and he gave me his car keys after my shift so I could go hide out in a car rather than the building. So I'm camping out in his car, and I'm still feeling quite tense. But after about 20 minutes, I start to feel at ease. Surely he won't come looking for me out here. Wrong. I looked over at the main entrance, and my heart drops. He is coming out of the door, and he's scrutinizing all the cars. I sank down as far as possible into my seat, but I wasn't fast enough, and he saw me. He comes rushing off and starts tapping the glass, so I open the door and ask him what's up. "I didn't see you in your usual spot, but luckily the doorman told me he saw you come out here. Why are your dad's car? Again? What am you supposed to say to that?" I told him I had a headache, so I'd come out to the car to take some Persimenthol and see if I could get some sleep. At least he respected that because he told me to feel better and left me alone. I breathed a sigh of relief, knowing that I was only going to be working there for a few more days before I had to go back to university. I told my dad about the car incident, and he gave Leon a talking to the next day. Leon would still come find me in the foyer, but he'd only talk to me for a few minutes in passing before leaving me alone, and there was a big relief. On my last day at work there, I was fully expecting him to do something crazy, but he didn't even come to chat with me that day. I left the office and thought that I would never see him again. I found out he was fired not long after I left the company that year because he kept coming into work late and then spent most of his time at work chatting with his coworkers and me apparently. Fast forward to January of 2014, and I was preparing to move to China for a position teaching English. I graduated from university and I was working at the same company, but this time in a semi-permanent capacity. It was my last day of work, so I received quite a few gifts and some fuss from my coworkers. It was about 10 a.m. when who should I see walk through the door but Leon. He had been hired as a temp to do the job that I had done for so many years. As soon as he walked through the door, he saw me and this flash of recognition crossed his face. I wanted to slide under my desk and die. It came walking over me and was all smiles, asking about how I was and why I was still doing at the company. I was at the point that one of my coworkers mentioned how I was off to China soon. Leon seized on that and started talking about his friend who was also interested in TFL. His interest seemed genuine, so I got to talk about how I got my TFL qualification, who I got it through, what company I would be working with for on China, etc., etc. We chatted for about 20 minutes and he wrote down some details for his friend and went off to work. At the end of the day, I was packing all my stuff to leave and a few of my coworkers were coming over to say their goodbyes. Don't get me wrong, the Leon incident aside, I had a wonderful time working at that time. Company and I had made a lot of great friends out of the corner. My eyes see Leon approaching, but I think, what's the harm? He says goodbye and wishes me luck on my new adventure. Then, as I'm literally walking out the door of the department, I hear him call out, "See you in China." For the first 2 weeks of my teacher training over there, I was like a hawk, keeping a constant lookout for this guy. He never did follow me out to China, but it still remains one of the creepiest encounters of my life.
On Thanksgiving weekend of 1950, a brutally frigid nor'easter storm was battering the coast of Massachusetts and was particularly harsh on the small town of Marblehead near Salem. Barl Atherton, a 47-year-old elementary school teacher, had 25 years of service under his belt and was home alone with his dog Esky, a white Spitz, who was her constant companion since the death of her father. That Ski was about the only companion she ever kept, and Atherton was a self-described spinster with no close friends or family. It is said that their favorite pastimes was watching old movies, and she would drive to the movie theater and Linda catch a show, but always went alone. With the freezing winds lashing at a drab clapboard cottage on Sewell Street, Beryl ran a few final errands before her small town was due to be snowed under. She made a run to the grocery store to pick up vital supplies, including a few extra cans of food for ACL2, before she took a few bags of garbage out to the trash cans outside her home at around 6 p.m. that Saturday evening. When she did so, she spotted a young neighbor boy watching her from a window of his home. She gave the boy a wave, and this was the last time she was seen for a good few days. As predicted, Marblehead was completely snowed under from the course of Thanksgiving weekend, and it took until Monday, November 27th, for the town to dig itself out and resume normal activities. The town's milkman, known among the locals simply as Pint, called on Miss Atherton's home to deliver her milk. Usually speaking, Pint would just leave a person's milk delivery on their doorstep, but he knew that Miss Atherton was extremely thin and frail at barely 100 pounds, and was concerned about her well-being after such a vicious snowstorm. So in this occasion, he actually knocked on Miss Atherton's door to ensure that she was okay. He knocked once, but there was no answer. Then again, but there was still no answer. With a hunch, Pine tried the door handle and found that it was unlocked. He wandered slowly through Miss Atherton's home at first, calling her name, then walked into the kitchen, finding a scene that would take his breath away. Miss Atherton was lying on the floor, face up, in a pool of her own clotted blood, with Esky lying near her body, mewling in considerable amount of pain. Pint screamed as he fled the house, careening to the home of one of Miss Atherton's neighbors and pleading with them to call the police. When the police arrived, they deduced that Barrow Atherton had been dead for days. On the kitchen table were her brown paper of grocery bags, still full of foodstuff she'd brought home when the last day she'd been seen alive by the curious neighbor boy, meaning that it had been only moments after this encounter that her murderer had pounced, and within maybe an hour of waving to the small boy, Beryl Atherton was lying in the pool of her own blood. She had several broken ribs and bruising around her throat where she appeared to have been strangled so hard that there was still fingernail imprints on her cold, dead flesh. Her killer had then used a small blade to slice her throat, but had done so in a very peculiar manner. Not only had he cut her neck open horizontally, but had also inflicted the dreadful vertical wounds from her ribs to her chin, essentially stepping across in her neck. The cuts are so deep that Beryl Atherton had almost been decapitated, and she had bled so heavily from her wounds that her blood vessels were completely sanguine. A tetanus sample would have to be extracted directly from her heart by the examining coroner. The killer then let himself out of the house, but not before breaking several of little Esky's ribs, as the loyal hound tried to avenge his fallen mistress infuriatingly. The crime scene was almost completely devoid of any clue as to the identity of Barrow's murderer. There wasn't a single sign of forced entry anywhere on the property. There were no fingerprints on the surface, and no shoe or boot prints on the ground surrounding the house. And despite questioning Barrow's neighbors, no one but the dog Esky had seen the killer in the flesh. If Miss Atherton cried out for help, the severity of the storm would probably have drowned out any urgent pleas of that fateful night. No one in the surrounding neighborhood had heard or seen anything. Despite the grotesque violence of the scene, there appeared to be a few signs of a struggle apart from a broken neck caused by the impact of the killer's blade, which had also broken during the savage and unprovoked attack. And aside from a few broken fingers that suggested she had fallen and failed to defend herself from the attacker, it seemed like he had managed to sneak up on Beryl while she was totally unaware. The crime scene was so lacking in useful evidence that it had been theorized the killer actually hung around for a little while, ensuring there were no fingerprints, fibers, or DNA present. And since the murder took place in Beryl's kitchen, the killer may well have had ample access to cleaning supplies in order to ensure the scene was scrubbed of evidence. Both police and friends were surprised by the fact Miss Atherton kept a diary which yielded information about a handful of male acquaintances. Those that knew her were completely unaware of such gentlemen, but the information therein offered no help in solving the crime. It was discovered she had been deeply disappointed over a broken love affair, but this proved not to enter into the case either. In the aftermath of Barrow's murder, with police unable to come up with any suspects or clear motives for her killing, in the small town of Marblehead became rife with rumors and gossip. Some said Barrow was leading some kind of double life and had become embroiled with organized crime down in Boston that had come back to bite her. Others believe it was a jilted lover from a broken love affair that had sought revenge after Barrow had broken the engagement off, or perhaps a relative who learned the sizable inheritance that they either wished to access early or about to be cut off from. Yet, her estate only consists of about $25,000, and no jewelry or other items appear to have been stolen from the house. So it seems that financial gain may not have been the motive. But chillingly enough, there are some living in Marblehead today who claim they know full well who killed Beryl, and a handful who assert that the killer is still alive. Given that the killer might well be up to 80 or 90 years old, it's more than likely they might pass away before ever facing any charges for the murder they committed. And so it seems that the brutal crime committed that Thanksgiving weekend may forever remain unsolved, and they get another cold and callous murder will escape justice, free to walk the streets, and the knowledge they committed the worst act a person is capable of and gotten away with it.
So I've never believed in paranormal activity. My brother had never believed either. And then he moved to my dad's for a few years after college. One night, him and I were at a bar drinking, and he looked at me and said, "I know you're gonna think I'm crazy, but I'm pretty sure Dad's house is haunted." When he's out of town, I hear people walking around upstairs, have woken up in bed hearing loud noises that get louder and louder like they're coming at me. I can't move until the noise stops. I pretty much laughed it off and chalked it up to night paralysis since I experienced it myself, and they're always accompanied by visual and audio hallucinations. Fast forward 5 or 6 years, my dad asked me to house sit since he's going to be gone for 2 weeks, and it's going to be vacation for my roommates for me, so I accept. I stay in my brother's room since it got covered to the guest room. First 4 or 5 days go by, nothing weird happens, and then it rained one night. I wake up and go upstairs. The light by the landing for the door and kitchen light both on. I chalked it up to being drunk the night before and just not turning them off. That night, I'm in the basement playing some games. I go upstairs and get a drink, come back down, and notice the closet door was open that didn't remember being opened. I attributed it to being cracked open, and then they opened the front door to check the mail. It was pulled open from section, so I shut it and made sure it was completely shut. Another couple of days go by with nothing. Then I'm laying in bed, about to go to sleep, when it sounds like someone was walking around above me. I figured it's just the house settling, but I keep hearing it and it isn't the house settling. It is a very distinct noise heading in a direction, stopping, and then heading back or in another direction. Every time I yell up that I was calling the police, it would stop moving, then start back up. I had not called the cops because remembering what my brother had said, and the fact that it would only temporarily stop when I yelled up. At this point, I grabbed my baseball bat and headed upstairs just in case. I turned on the lights, kept talking to this intruder. I searched every inch of the upstairs, and the way to set it up, there is no real way to go from room to room. I noticed no hallways upstairs, just 3 rooms, 2 of which had wide openings to each other, then the bathroom and bedroom in the corner. I searched for about an hour, then went back downstairs and shut off all the lights. About 10 minutes later, it started up again. This time, it lasted about 30 minutes. I didn't get any sleep a few more days with nothing. Then one night, I was in bed again, and I hear this faint 8-bit sound and music. I start slowly getting louder and louder. At this point, I'm in full panic mode because what my brother had said, unlike him, I have no paralysis. So I jump out of bed, grab my pillow and blanket, and go out to the couch in the living room. I didn't hear the sound once I left the room. I stayed up watching TV for a bit before falling asleep on the couch. It rained again that night, and when I woke up, the closet that was open before was wide open again, and the light above the front door landing was on again. I was sober that night, and I knew I hadn't opened the closet since there was no need for me to go into it. And I know the light was off because it was on when you're watching TV in the basement. It kind of blinds you. After that, I stayed on the couch, no more instances besides another night. It rained and the lights being on again, and my dad came back. I asked him if he'd ever experienced anything weird in this house. He said he never had. I told him my story. Then he said he'd always thought there might be something because no matter what time of year there was, always a flyer to his house and never has any other bugs. A couple of weeks after, he came back. He called me after a rainstorm to say that the light above the landing was on and he was woken up. Since then, he said the only times it happens is when it rains or when my brother I have been at the house that week. I'm still not 100% a believer by any means. That being said, I still get goosebumps every time I tell anyone about it, even as I type this out. I'm also a lot more open to believe weird things people tell me that seem unbelievable. Last year, hype over the TikTok app was at its peak, so I foolishly decided to see what the big deal was. Don't get me wrong, some of the surface stuff was pretty cool. All little dance routines and lip sync videos keep me entertained for a while. But I think I went a little too deep down the rabbit hole, because I found just about the creepiest trash I'd ever come across. I'm not even sure how I found this guy. I mean, like I said, I was just tapping and scrolling, going further and further down my TikTok rabbit hole. But somehow, I ended up watching a video of this guy with glasses and a handlebar mustache saying stuff like, "Good morning, my queens above 18." So as you can imagine right away, I'm all like, what in God's name is this mess? I scrolled through his TikToks a little before coming across another video from the sky, the king, where he greets people with queens above 18. First of all, who says stuff like that? But second, the guy was obsessed with the ideas of his queens being above 18. Like anyone who talks about it, that much is definitely a little PSAs. But then the video goes on showing him asking all of his queens to do something called the King Challenge, which turned out to be nothing more than getting girls to wear a white t-shirt and then having them pour water down the front of their shirt. I'm not kidding. It's all the King Challenge evolved. It was just the creepy way he tried to sound almost fatherly about it, to like, I swear to God, at one point, even said like, try to make it fun. Make a little game out of it, McQueens. Just everything about this guy screamed absolute creep, and I was barely surprised when I saw that he'd reply to a comment asking, "Why have you been talking to my 16-year-old girlfriend?" or something like that. So as you can tell, TikTok is on thin ice already. I'm already kind of jabbed with social media in general, purely for the number of creeps that use it, and that's on top of the fact that social media is super bad for your mental health. Like, I don't want anything on my phone that makes me feel terrible or creeps me out. Then I'm not kidding. Like 5 minutes later, I'm scrolling through some of the less popular dance TikToks when I come across the video that made me go, I'm out. It starts off with this old dude like crouched down propping his phone against something to record himself. So at first, all you see is this dude's wrinkles. And then as the guy steps away from the phone, you see his barefoot with jeans on. Then there's nothing on his upper half, but what I'm guessing was one half of an extra small girl's bathing suit with the tube top kind. And then he starts doing these creepy hand dances while growling completely inaudible words underneath his breath, all in what looked a lot like the basement of a serial killer. All I could think was that his little dance routine might be the last thing I see before he bashes my Scotland or something. And this cold shiver just runs right through me. I get that apps like TikTok make people happy and bring people together and all that good stuff. I honestly get that. But to me, social media has always been this glimpse into how petty, immature, and downright frightening human beings can be. So yeah, TikTok. It's going to be a no for me, dog. I'm a French student doing a master's in Amsterdam in the Netherlands. I live alone in apartments in a building where there are only students. I'm 22, enjoying life peacefully. To give you a bit of context, I live in a calm, good neighborhood. The only noises I had here are the tram or parties in the building since a lot of students are there. One night around 10 p.m., I hear a knock on my door. I live on the 3rd floor, and to get to my front door, you have to open the main door, which needs a key. Then you need to open the door to my corridor with the same key. So people who want to come to my door must have the key, call me, or ring at the door so I could open the door for them from my apartment. Nothing of this happened. I just hear a knock at my door. I usually open the door without a second thought, whether it's my landlord or a neighbor asking for something. As he told you, I feel pretty safe in the building, and I could also take care and defend myself in case anything happens. But this time, for some reason, I had a bad feeling about this. I didn't move at first. I thought the person would just leave. I finished my assignments. However, the knocking continued for 30 seconds. I said, "Yeah," in English. The person knocking doesn't say anything. I say in English again, "Who is it?" The voice answers in English. It's Uber Eats, which is weird because Dutch always speak in Dutch, and I recognize the voices and accents of everyone on my floor who have the key to access the floor. So it wasn't a neighbor, it wasn't my landlord, it was someone claiming to come from Uber Eats. But the issue is, I didn't order anything from Uber Eats that day. The voice was unfamiliar. In case it's a prank or a neighbor pulling a joke, it was also a deep voice, at least 40 and probably a smoker. I replied that I didn't order anything, you must have it wrong. After a few seconds, The knocking continues and the same voice says, "Pretty sure you did have an order under your name." I start panicking. I look around and pick up a knife in case he breaks the door because the knocking was getting a bit louder. I checked if my door was locked. It wasn't. I was literally 10 centimeters away from him. My front door was the only thing keeping him from me, and I'm glad it doesn't open from the outside. He needed a key to open it even if it's not locked. I stepped again and asked, "What's the name?" He seems to be thinking for a few seconds when a final knock occurs. It was loud and it translated some anger, frustration. Finally, I hear him going down the emergency stairs right next to my apartment. The steps were heavy and the person was clearly in a hurry. I don't know what he wanted or what would have happened to me if I'd opened the door as I usually do. I still haven't understood how he got through the 2 doors. And why did he come specifically to the last apartment on the 3rd floor? Did he try others before I posted the post about it on the WhatsApp group we have in the building? No one saw anything suspicious, so no one opened the door for anyone. Either way, I'm lucky for my instinct telling me not to open the door, and I'm glad I listened. This happened a very long time ago. I just turned 13, and as ashamed as I am to admit it, I was head over heels in love with Justin Bieber. Although it's plain as the nose on my face now that he's the king of cheese, back then I was convinced I was going to be his wife, and nobody was going to tell me otherwise. Due to my blind allegiance to the Biebs, I would comb the internet on a daily basis and search up pages of forums about him. I was overjoyed the day that I discovered a new forum that alleged to be the official Justin Bieber forum. Of course, I would join right away and began making posts pledging my undying love for him. Within a matter of months, I became one of the top posters. This honor was beginning to make me feel somewhat popular within this fandom. However, like most other young people, I was growing bored with the same names and started to search for a new place dedicated to my beloved Justin. A few days of Yahoo searches led me to a relatively new forum with a chat room. Once again, I joined up as fast as I could, and I started looking for folks to talk to. The first few weeks, the room was almost dead. This didn't bother me though. I saw it as a chance to be in at the ground floor of something new, and even maybe get the attention of Justin himself. The following week showed a great amount of growth in the forum, and boatloads of fans soon began to pour in. I would welcome the new members one by one, and thought of them all as my friends. One girl and I began chatting and became besties in no time. After talking back and forth for a few months, we discovered that I lived in the next town over. Since we were the 2 biggest Justin Bieber fans, it was only logical we should meet. So on a Sunday morning in August, I imagined my mom and dad talking to me to a park on the edge of town to meet my best friend. I tried to get my mom to drop me off and leave, but she wouldn't. I was so worried she was going to embarrass me. After all, my friends, we'll call her Zoe, assured me she lived nearby, and her mom could bring me home. Mom wasn't having it, and I'm so thankful she wasn't. The plan was for us to meet at a picnic table in the far end of the park, and Zoe said it was just a few yards from her door, and she'd walk over when she saw me arrive. I sat at the table and waited. About 5 minutes passed before I was approached by a middle-aged man. He asked me my name, and I hesitated to answer, so he quickly explained that Zoe had sent him to get me. She was unable to come over right then, but if I followed him, he takes me over to the house. I had no reason to not trust him, but something about him scared me. I told him I'd wait, but he continued trying to convince me. As he started to get closer, I began stepping backward. The look on his face became wilder and wilder with each step. I finally gave up on the pretense and blurted out that I didn't believe him. Once that was said, his eyes bulged out and he lunged and tried to grab me. I let out a scream and continued moving backward now at a faster pace. When I was sure I had enough space, I turned and ran for my mom's car. The distance between the table and the car seemed like a mile. I could hear him running behind me, and he was getting closer by the second. When I caught sight of our car, I began screaming for my mom as long as I could. If I could make it to the car, I was sure I'd be safe. I was about 50 yards from the car. My mom got out and began rushing to me. She had the most terrified look I'd ever seen on her face. We met one another a few steps from the car, and she grabbed me and began asking me what was wrong. I turned around to show her, but the strange man was gone. A feeling of relief washed over me. I turned back to her and attempted to explain what had just happened. The miracle, she understood a word, but she listened intently and led me back to the car. From there, we drove directly to the police station down the road, and I told the police the whole story. My computer was taken, and I was without any connection to the internet. At that time, I was still unsure what had really happened and wanted to talk to Zoe again. My mom wouldn't let me use her laptop to do it, and it wasn't until she explained to me what had been going on did I understand the seriousness of the situation. Even then, the police had to map out every little aspect of it before I accepted that Zoe wasn't real. This fact hit me like a truck. I probably cried for a whole week. Not only did I feel stupid about being tricked and scared from very nearly getting abducted, I felt like my best friend had just died. It all seems so childish in retrospect, but that's just what I was then, a child, and one that didn't know any better. The guy who had orchestrated everything was eventually caught and convicted. The police was positive. He had done the same thing to at least one other girl, but he wasn't talking. He took a plea bargain, so there was no trial. I don't know if I would have had the guts to testify if there had been. Since then, I've went through the counseling process, and that helped me a lot. At least now I can laugh about it. When I grew up, I was determined that all those I love would have drilled into their head that people aren't always who they claim to be on the internet. The day my younger sister first logged on, I spent almost an hour telling her my story and about the other hundreds of dangers online. I did my best not to scare her, but it was very important to me that she'd be prepared. Yesterday was her 13th birthday, and I reminded her one last time to be careful. Since it was all fresh in my mind, I figured I'd write it down and share it. My hopes are that others will show it to the young people in their lives so that they have the skills to navigate the net in a safer way and not have the same experience as I did. Every once in a blue moon, I like to log on to the deep web and search for weird and strange things. In general, it's a relatively tame place. All the stories you hear about red rooms and hitmen are bold 99% of the time, and these sites you see covered on YouTube are just FBI and other various law enforcement agency honey traps set up to capture criminals and stupid kids looking to score online. The majority of the trafficking taking place on the deep web these days is insider leaking information to journalists and pervs sharing lewd photos of kids. Yes, there are many other uses for it, but the virtual anonymity of the platform allows these behaviors to thrive. I would like to make it clear, I wholly support whistleblowers having a safe place to pass on information they might have, by the way, but obviously not the illicit stuff that people do on there. And the story that I'm about to share occurred in my early days surfing the deep web. I had heard all the stories and was eager to see how real they were. Like others, I was a little disappointed in what I'd found. The raciest place I'd come across was a picture and video forum that was heavy on the adult stuff. I guess the best description of it is a deep blue X-hamster crossed with live leak. Everything was allowed as long as it was legal, so the kid stuff was banned. Thankfully, the adult videos were the main reason I was there, not gonna lie. A lot of the other members traded their homemade videos and pictures between one another, and I enjoyed checking those posts out. Most of the modern mainstream adult movies are a little degrading to the actresses, but I discovered the amateur stuff was not pretty vanilla, actually has made them much easier for me to enjoy. It may have been my third or fourth time I visited the site, when I got a private message from another member. I wasn't sure why he chose me or even how he knew I was there at the time, but I read it anyway. He said he was a moderator and noticed I visited multiple times but had not shared anything. Apparently, the sharing thing will not require was highly encouraged. He wanted to know if I had anything to share. Basically, I've never been the kind of filming myself doing it. However, I didn't want to cause any trouble. After thinking about it for a minute, I remember I had a few photos of my ex-girlfriend's older sister she had sent me. Don't ask. And so I sent those 30 minutes later. He sent a second message. He sounded pleased with the pictures and had a few files I could download. Despite being grateful, I was a bit leery of downloading something from a stranger, but my curiosity got the best of me. The first few videos were pretty average yet enjoyable. However, the next was a bit unsettling. The video started with a close-up of a woman's leg wearing a spiked heel, and then it pulled away to show a kitten laying on the floor. This confused me for a second, but when the woman raised her leg and stomped on the kitten, I spent the next several minutes weeping uncontrollably. Being a massive animal lover, this kind of garbage horrifies me. Call me a child all you want, but there was nothing appealing about this. The tears eventually gave over to sheer anger, and I sent a venom-laden message to this idiot voicing my distaste for his joke. I let my anger get the best of me, and I foolishly threatened to send them to the cops. Looking back on this now, it was an empty threat. The cops wouldn't likely be able to find the guy or really care. After witnessing what I had, I stayed off the deep web for about a month. When I did return, I noticed a new message from the guy that sent me the horrible videos. I was reluctant to read it at first, kind of wanted to move on and put it behind me. But another part of me wanted to see the justification for thinking I'd like that garbage. Ultimately, I made the right choice, or maybe not, it depends on perspective. I guess what I would read I was not expecting for some reason. He got into his head that I didn't belong on the forum, and he wanted to drive me away. My mistake was threatening him. He must have foreseen this, and he suggested I search my hard drive. He claimed he had hidden a file within the download that had enough CPU to put me in prison for a long time. This left me with no defense. A search on my hard drive uncovered an unknown file that I didn't recognize, and it was indeed a massive file. Although it may have been nothing, there was no way I was going to take the chance of infecting my computer with this filth.
In the early 20th century, Markia Sarenko escaped from her home country of Russia, feeling the bloodthirsty Bolsheviks who were in the process of turning their native land into the political wasteland that was the USSR. She escaped over the border to China, who at the same time had yet to be consumed by communism as a temporary stopover on her way to the United States. However, it was in China that the superstitious Maria consulted a fortune teller, wishing to get a good idea of what her journey had in store for her. The Chinese fortune teller gave Maria some very good news indeed, telling her that not only would she successfully make it to the United States, but that she would give birth to a daughter, whose beauty would become globally renowned. But that under all circumstances, she should avoid so-called dark waters. Then, after making it all the way to San Francisco, Maria gave birth to a daughter on July 20th, 1938, naming her Natalia Nikolaevna Zarenko. Natalia would gain the fame that the fortune teller had predicted, but would be known by another name entirely. That name was Natalie Wood. Natalie's mother essentially groomed her for stardom from the time she learned to walk and talk. She sent her to singing, dancing, and acting lessons, training her to be a complete triple threat, before parading her around movie studios in the hopes that she would be discovered, and thus fulfill her destiny. It was such an intensive experience that it verged on abuse. Natalia's mother was utterly ruthless and unforgiving, separating her from her sister and even denying her medical assistance for injuries in the instance that this would only make her stronger. Maria paid close attention to the prophetic warnings of the fortune teller, and made an effort to give Natalia a deep ingrained fear of deep water. Yet, despite her efforts, the fortune teller's predictions almost came true on the set of a movie called The Green Promise. During shooting, a young Natalie was set to run across a bridge that was set to collapse during a rainstorm, a bridge that just so happened to run over a pool of rough, dark water. The director insisted that the timing would be just right, and although there would be an element of on-screen peril, she would be entirely safe, but terrifyingly enough, one of the set stuff happened to pull the collapsed mechanism too early, and Natalie broke her wrist as she fell into the water. Her mother was distraught, believing she was about to see the prophecy of drowning come true before her very eyes. But the set staff, acting quickly, helped Natalie pull herself to safety as she struggled to do so with a broken wrist. If she wasn't terrified of water beforehand, she certainly was then. Maria refused to get her daughter any medical assistance for the broken wrist either, believing that an insistence on doing so would deter directors from hiring her in the future. The injury scarred her wrist so heavily that Natalie went on instead on covering the scars with multiple bracelets for the rest of her life. Not only because she believed the wound was ugly, because it reminded her of one of the most traumatic instances of her life, so traumatic that she never, ever learned to swim, and was reported to have panic attacks whenever she tried to wash her hair. Despite her traumas, Natalie had a long and successful film career, and will go on to wed fellow star Robert Wagner. They had a rocky relationship, and naturally got divorced and remarried before having their one and only daughter, Natasha. Then, during Thanksgiving weekend of 1981, Natalie Roberts and another movie star, Christopher Walken, were enjoying some rest and relaxation aboard Wagner's yacht, named the Splendor, around the Catalina Island off the coast of California. Only one other person was with them, the boat's captain, a man named Dennis Davern. They spent the weekend shopping, sunning themselves, sailing, dining out, and profusely drinking on the night of November 27, 1981, after yet another evening of heavy drinking. An argument between Natalie and Robert broke out when it grew so intense that Natalie demanded that Captain Davern take her ashore on the small dinghy that was kept on board the Splendor. The pair then spent the night in a hotel before returning to the boat the following morning, when Natalie and Robert apparently talked things out and buried the hatchet. The following night, Robert, Natalia, Captain Davern, and Christopher Walken went ashore to dine in a restaurant called Doug's Harbor Reef. Here, they continued their stint of heavy drinking, reportedly ordering 2 bottles of wine, 2 bottles of champagne, and numerous daiquiris, with one of the waiting staff reporting that they barely touched their food. The proper people were so intoxicated that the restaurant manager reportedly called harbor security to ensure that they made it back to the boat safely that night. According to Captain Davern, Robert Wagner and Christopher Walken argued violently over politics, as well as the direction that Natalie's career should take. He has since stated that the argument grew so violent that one of the men threw an empty wine bottle at the other before Natalie had to get involved to separate the pair. The argument then shifts to one between Natalie and Robert, with Natalie apparently telling Robert that she'd had enough before retiring to her room for the night at around 3:30 a.m. The next morning, on November 29th of 1981, a ship-to-shore call was made from the Splendor, one in which Captain Davern reported to the U.S. Coast Guard that Natalie Wood was missing. A search begins, one that ended just a few hours later at around 8 a.m., when Natalie Wood's drowned body is found floating near the ship's inflatable dinghy, the very same one she had used to escape the boat just 2 days prior. She was wearing nothing but a nightgown, a pair of socks, and a jacket. The autopsy showed that she had a blood alcohol content of 0.14%, almost double the legal limit for driving. There was also evidence that she had taken a rather large amount of powerful painkillers, and the time before her death. She was just 43 years old when she passed away. Amazingly, on the day she died, Robert Wagner is not intensively questioned by police. It's only a few days later that the 3 men who were on the boat that night are brought in for questioning, and when they are each tells us suspiciously similar stories that details the evening's events. As a result, Natalie's death was assumed to be nothing more than an accidental drowning. The nation was dumbstruck by such a horrible, unforeseeable tragedy, and mourned in tandem with Robert Wagner, who went on to raise their 2 daughters as a single parent. 2 daughters who are almost inconsolable, distraught at the sudden death of their beloved mother,
Natalie's death seemed to remain an open and shut case for an entire 30 years, until a shocking revelation turned public attention back onto the situation. Captain Dennis Davern, the man who had been captaining the Splendor that night, broke his silence on the case and came forward to state that he had in fact lied to the investigating law enforcement. The nation was shocked to hear that the argument that night between Walken and Wagner had not actually been rooted in politics, but the suspicion that Walken had been secretly flirting with Natalie whenever Robert Wagner's back was turned. As was previously mentioned, the argument then shifted to one between Wagner and Natalie after Walken that retired to his room. But then, when Natalie had tried to do the same and retire to bed, Robert Wagner had followed her to continue the argument. Then, sometime later, Wagner stormed up to Captain Davern, sweating and panicking, and told him to turn off all the boat's lights and ignore all onshore calls that came into the boat. In the aftermath, Davern claimed that Wagner kept him confined to his quarters in order to prevent him from giving a statement to the police, then held an impromptu meeting in which he ordered Walken and Davern to keep quiet about the arguments and to essentially give false statements to the police. In light of such statements, police reopened the investigation into Natalie Wood's death in the year 2012. A re-examining of the information gleaned from her autopsy had one corner declaring that she had died as a result of drowning, but also from other undetermined factors. Then, in 2018, Wagner was officially named as a person of interest in Natalie Wood's death. Natalie's sister Alana came out and gave a media interview, stating that she believed Captain Davern's claims to be true, and had even confronted Wagner on the day of Natalie's funeral in an attempt to get him to reveal what had actually happened that night. This culminated in an appearance on the popular TV show Dr. Fell, in which Lena and Davern publicly accused Wagner of being solely responsible for Natalie's death. However, Lana was keen to make it clear that she didn't believe it to be outright murder, and that she didn't believe Wagner ever really intended to kill his wife, but either because lost in his rage during a heat-in-the-moment decision, possibly denying Natalie help when she had fallen into the water while trying to leave the boat to go ashore, just as she had done just 2 nights previous. Despite the accusations from her sister, Natalie's 2 daughters, Natasha and Courtney, stand by their father's version of events, saying he had done all he could to preserve the mother's legacy. Courtney is not even Robert's biological daughter, but adores him so much that she has even taken on his surname, potentially is a sign of loyalty and respect. She personally believes and has publicly stated that Captain Davern is a fabricator, one who simply wishes to make a name for himself, exploiting her mother's death for monetary gain, and these claims do carry some weight to them. For example, Davern not only took 30 years to come forward with his accusations, but was also, by his own admission, extremely drunk on the night in question. His story is apparently changed multiple times throughout the years, leaking seedy gossip to tabloid journalists the entire time. He had also written a book about the events of the night in question, one which has been analyzed and debunked by numerous people who asserted that Davern's version of events are extremely spurious. When asked about Davern's claims, Robert's biological daughter, Natasha, was reportedly said he is somebody who I cannot even dignify with a response because he is so undignified. As for Christopher Walken, the only other person aboard the Splendor that evening, he hasn't spoken much at all about the incident, keeping suspiciously quiet over the years. When asked about how he felt regarding the reopening of the case, he reportedly said, "I don't know," having previously said that he firmly believed Natalie's death to be a tragic accident. In conclusion, it's not entirely out of the question that an extremely intoxicated Natalie might have tried to use the very same dinghy she had used a few nights previous, and doing so, she could have simply fallen into the water and drowned while the other people on board were either too drunk to respond to her cries or simply below deck and unable to hear her entirely. Yet, it's also scarcely feasible that a jealous husband had discovered her infidelities, either perceived or real, thrown her into the sea in a rage, and simply used his influence or outright threats to cover up the murder. It has been 39 years since Natalie's tragic death, and we are still no closer to knowing the entire truth as to what happened to her that night. And it's not only her family and friends that deserve concrete answers, but society as a whole.
Have we had a murderer walking among the Hollywood elite for the past 40 years or so? Or has an innocent man been subjected to a campaign of slander when he should have been given room to heal? Whatever happened that Thanksgiving weekend, one thing is painfully clear, that the dark prophecy told to Maria Zakharhenko by the Chinese fortune teller in the early 20th century did actually come true. And it was indeed dark waters that became the undoing of the young woman who came to be known to the world as Natalie Wood.
In my early 20s, I was going through a phase where I was into bodybuilding. And the most place where I spent my most 20s, gym was like a second home. And I would work out for hours along with my friends who were also into bodybuilding at the time. We would spend so many hours helping each other and trying to buy the proteins and all the supplies that we would need to keep up our regimen. It wasn't very easy to do such. Things weren't that easy to get during those days. The protein powders cost us fortunes, and the whole supplement things were so fresh and so expensive that we would barely afford it. We would have to attend stupid seminars and stuff like that to get a glimpse of these supplements, and most seminars would hand out sample boxes and we would do that. One such seminar happened in an undisclosed location. It was a secret seminar, and someone had already spread the rumor that Arnold is collaborating with it. Now, Arnold was a very big name, and to have Arnold's brand name was everything in the bodybuilding days. We would be on the road for days for that, but this time, this seminar was right in our city and it was pretty epic. We got the address through message, and we decided to go, and when we went to the place, there was just us and some other dudes and really well-suited men, and they were in no way bodybuilders, but were definitely sketchy and not dressed usually like people were in these seminars. And then they all handed us out the boxes, and there were two ways that we could have the boxes of protein. One was either if we bought it, or the second was that if we sold 3 boxes, we would get a box for free. And so all of us did enroll for the second option. And we decided that we were going to showcase it at the gym, and people can buy it from there. So instead of buying, we decided to give it a shot at selling. About a month into the box, one of the elite bodybuilders of our team was hooked on that protein, and so he ordered more. And just because I had no box left, I had to give him the one I had, so I never got the chance to use it for myself. But I had some cash and it was pretty good. 7 people in our gym used that protein. Out of those 7, 4 found the taste to be weird, and 3 were completely hooked on the stuff, and they were out of 3 boxes in 3 weeks, boxes that should have gone for about a month. We got the news 2 weeks later. All 3 bodybuilders failed and post-mortem found that they have consumed a huge amount of cocaine and other chemicals mixed in with it. But the surprising thing was they never took drugs. I realized what had happened, and I dumped all the protein boxes, and I knew what was going on. The first thing we did was inform the authorities. We shared with them the address, and the guys were caught, and those people were actually dealers peddling coke through protein. They got caught, and the trauma of everything made me drop the whole gym thing.
Hey guys, thanks so much for all the support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so.
Back in my freshman year of college, me and a few buddies thought that it would be a good idea to drive down to Fort Lauderdale for spring break. Florida was awesome, and I guess all the stress of transitioning to college meant we needed to blow off a little steam, because we partied our balls off for a few days and eventually met with the dude who hooks us up with something a little stronger than Corona. He asked us what we wanted, and we're just young and dumb and excited, so we're like, whatever you got, bro, lay it on us. So my buddies is talking to this dude, and we're just messing around on the beach and shocking some beers with some unwary seniors. And he calls over like, you guys want to try some X? And we're like, yeah, sure, let's try it. We buy a tan beach in downtown with a little beer, and then the guy starts telling us how he has this stuff called GHB for sale. Now, I didn't notice at the time, but GHB was pretty popular in the southern states, and it stands for gamma hydroxybutyric acid. Try saying that 10 times fast. Some places register it as an anesthetic. It's so strong that this guy was just selling it out of the trunk of his car. But that's what you get when the spring break in Florida, I guess. Anyways, the way the dude sold it, I was like, yeah man, Your body naturally produces this stuff. It's totally natural, and it'll get you way messed up. We're just out of our minds at this point, and in no fit state to make rational decisions. But even in that state of mind, I wasn't all that keen on buying some weird drug I'd never heard of some guy's trunk. Only, here's where the problem came in. I'm not exactly a little guy. I'm 6'1". I played right guard on my high school football team. So half an hour after I swallowed that tab, I wasn't feeling a fricking thing. So I confront the dealer complaining that he sold me a dud, and this guy is no gangster. So he offers me a free dose of GHB instead, telling me that it will mess me up all this other stuff. He opened his trunk, and there's this gallon jug of what I guess was GHB. He's telling me to take a shot from the bottle cap and goes around front to get some of the glove box or something. So I do as he says, take a shot at this weird salty concoction from his gallon jug's cap. Next thing I know, the dude is looking at me with this horrified look on his face. I'm already feeling the effects of this stuff, and he's looking at me. Turns out good. GHB hits you really hard, but I'm like, what, dude? He then reaches into his trunk and pulls out a much, much smaller water bottle, like an 18-ounce bottle, and tells me that's the bottle I should have shot from. Picture it. Little water bottle cap. That's maybe half a shot of whiskey in there. But a gallon jug has like 2 doubles, and that's how much GHB drank in one go. So there's me, having done something that had an actual drug dealer scared, and I'm like, I've taken way too much of this. Haven't I this on top of the fact that GHB mixed with alcohol can potentially be fatal? But for a while there, I felt great. Like, it sounds messed up, I know, but there was maybe 10 or 15 minutes where I was just flying high, and walk back over to my friends. We walk off in search of more beer and more girls, and boom, that's all I can remember from that day. The next memory I have after that is bright lights and peeling my eyes open and wondering where I am, and all I can see is bright white lights. And they were the lights on the ceiling of my room in the hospital. I can't move. I can't talk. All I can do is just move my eyes to look down and see all these tubes coming out of my mouth, like trailing down my chest. Before I can think another thing, this nurse appears and tells me not to worry, that I'm in the emergency room, having just woken up from a medically induced coma because I overdosed. The first thing that runs through my mind is how mad my mom and dad are gonna be. Like, I seriously could have died, and that's one of my first actual thoughts after waking up. Not how lucky I was to be alive. Not know how dumb I've been messing around with GHB, just wonder what mom and dad are gonna think. But in the end, I think they were just relieved I was okay. I know how dumb and irresponsible I've been. I didn't need some lecture punishment. A brush with death was punishment enough. But it's weird, because aside from the initial uh-oh moment, I wasn't scared. I was too messed up to be scared. And by the time I woke up, the danger was over. There's something that gives me chills when I look back on it, and we look at everything I have now, everything I've learned, and realize I only have it by the grace of God. A few years back, when my boyfriend and I being a 22-year-old female, were living in a 1-bedroom apartment in downtown Denver, about a mile away from the coveted Larimer Square and tourist favorite 16th Street. The location was fantastic, but with people-dense areas often comes trouble. We live in a historic house with 4 downtown houses next to one another, and layout is important to the story. All 4 front doors were aligned on a single porch. The apartment was located next to an alley and was the last door on the left. Due to a work obligation, my boyfriend was sent on a 3-month-long work assignment, leaving me alone in the house with our 2 dogs. No sweat off my back. After growing up in a small town in the Northeast, I was eager to explore. My days after work were filled with long walks around the dog park and exploring restaurants and craft breweries in downtown. All was well, until it wasn't. Being alone most of the time and raised in a town of 4,000 of my cousins, exaggeration, but not really. I was docile and trusting, the worst combination. After a month into being alone in the city, I would come home to 3 men smoking outside my door. The first encounter, I decided to keep walking and called a nearby friend to help me get into my house safely. I thought this was a one-time thing, but weeks later, the men continually showed up. It was routine. When I got home at 5, they were there lighting up a cigarette, almost like they were there waiting for me. I was finally at my wit's end and asked them if they lived here and whether they could verify that with my landlord. None of them answered, and 2 proceeded to walk down the alley. But one remained stone cold and standing his ground, continuing smoking. I was upset, and I repeated the question. Do you live here? Can you verify this? He stared at me with dark, cold eyes and put his cigarette out on my door, only to brush my shoulder as he left my property. Safe to say, I was unnerved. I reached out to my boyfriend to let him know what had happened, and he relayed the message to our landlady. A few days had gone by since my past encounter, and there were no signs of these men. I felt pretty good about myself. I had taken for granted being able to walk up my apartment steps without being fearful. I had made it to Friday, and decided to treat myself to a few drinks with local friends. I become diligent about locking windows and doors. Being next to an alley made me feel extremely vulnerable, and after my confrontation with the porch creeps, I was on edge. My night out was enjoyable, and after a few beers, I decided it was time to go home. Thankfully, a friend of mine insisted on making sure that I got into the house safely. After all, he was the one who had assisted me on a few occasions before I arrived home, and he walked me to my door upon arrival. But my door was covered in ash, and the porch floor and cigarette butts with the aroma of freshly smoked cigarettes in the air. He could see the fear on my face, and offered to sleep on the couch to keep watch, but I told him that I would be fine on my own. I stayed up a bit longer, double-checking locks and pulling my blinds down. After about 20 minutes, I retreated to my bedroom, which faced my front door, being sure to keep the door ajar so my Rhodesian Ridgeback could be aware of anything happening outside my door. After a bit of Netflix, I finally dozed off until 3 a.m., when I awoke to my dog growling. I was petrified. Something in me knew tonight was the night here they would be back. I got to my bed slowly, trying to make as little sound as possible. I appeared on my door and saw a single hand on the stained glass window and a pair of eyes peering in. Sure enough, he was back. I had unfortunately left my kitchen lamp on, exposing my house to the outside world, and knew if he saw me, it was game on. Slowly and quietly, I made my way to the lamp and turned it off so he could no longer see me, which ensued terror. The man, appearing to be shirtless and yelling slurs at me, began pounding on my door, demanding entrance. I retreated to my room and called 911, who told me to stay low, avoid interaction, and to stay on the line. So the officers arrived. I couldn't stand watching him punch the window, because I knew it was a race between him and the officers for whoever got to me first. Finally, there was a loud crash. I peered through the door, cracked to see that he had upgraded from a hand to a brick, causing the glass to begin cracking. I remember vividly. It had been almost 10 minutes on the phone with dispatch at this point, with officers 10 minutes away from my home. After a few more brick throws, I watched him scale the porch to my window, continuing to try to obliterate the glass, leaving the cracks in his wake. And then, there was silence. I once again looked toward my door to see him looking back at me, cigarette in hand, until the cops arrived. I was told to wait for a knock on my door, which finally came, and to tell me it was safe to come out, and I made it outside, just as they were putting him in the back of the vehicle, which he yelled, "Bye, Pete." This shook me to my core. Only my family referred to me as that, and they were thousands of miles away. I realized that he had been watching, listening, waiting. He probably knew my boyfriend was gone, and most likely heard me refuse to have my friends stay here. I watched the vehicle drive away and called whoever I could get a hold of at this hour. Come morning, my mom finally called me back and told me to get in touch with officers and press charges, something that entirely slipped my mind during the mayhem. I called them back and asked them to get the paperwork, only to be told that he was put in the hospital and ran off before properly identifying him.
I was 17 at that time, and I need to give you a little background. It was 80s and before cell phones. I'm a female, and I had a best friend at my high school who I'll call C for short. C and I met when her brother asked me to be his girlfriend, and she didn't like me at first. She would walk around me and taunt me, but once I stood up to her, she began to respect me and then got to know me properly. Now, because I knew her and her brother, it was a very short-lived romance. I spent a lot of time hanging around at their house, and C also had a young twin brothers, her mom and her older male cousin who lived in the house. Over the time, I became close friends with the family, and her mother even offered me a job. She sold beautiful clothes via fashion shows and asked me to be a model. I really enjoyed that job and the friendship I made. Then one night, she asked me to spend the night, which I hadn't done before, so I said yes. But I couldn't get a ride to her house until it was already pretty late, and my ride dropped me off, and rather than waiting to see if I got in safely, just drove away. Walking up to the house, it was completely dark and quiet, and when I knocked, no one came to the door. I knocked again, and still nothing. I was stuck there and had to get someone to wake up and let me in. And I was beginning to get scared. There were a couple of other houses on the street, but for some reason, they were all dark and quiet too. I walked about a quarter of a mile down the dark, deserted street to a payphone, and I dialed C's number. After several rings, she eventually answered and unlocked the door for me. As I walked back to her house from the phone booth, she went back to the bed, and I went into the house. It was as dark as quiet inside as it was outside, and I made my way to her room, where I thought I was going to be sleeping, but she had fallen back to sleep and locked her bedroom door. Her young twin brothers were still awake and invited me to sleep in their room, as they had 2 sets of bunk beds, so each twin had his own bed with an extra for the older cousin. I didn't see the other brother, my former boyfriend, that night at all. That was a fine situation for me, as I liked the twins, who were about 9 years old. So I lay in one of the bottom bunks, and I was ready to sleep. The boys were talking like kids do, and they were fine, but the older cousin was in there as well, I believe in the bunk above me. But they never turned on the light, so I wasn't really sure. Now, while the twins talked and giggled about nothing, the cousin, who was at least 20, maybe older, began making very inappropriate comments to me, which in pitch blackness was all the more unsettling, because I couldn't see where he even was in the room. At first, I ignored him, thinking he was just being a dick. But he persisted. It didn't matter to him that the 2 young boys were in the same room either, and he got more and more explicit in saying the things he wanted to do with me. I was really creeped out by this point, but I still didn't think he would actually do anything. I kept asking him to stop talking to me like that, but he wouldn't. It just escalated, and I couldn't tell he was going to leave me alone, so I finally got up and walked out of the room, still in the dark, and I made my way to my friend's room right across the hall. I knocked and knocked on her bedroom door. When she didn't make a sound, I could see that C was a very deep sleeper, and her door was still locked. This entire time, the cousin kept talking and scaring me, and as I frantically tried to wake my friend, he began getting out of his bunk and coming towards the hall where I was. I had to do something fast. For some reason, C's mom wasn't home that night. But since I had spent so much precious time in that house, I knew it pretty well. I knew that there was a den right there next to the room that I had been in with the boys, and I knew that den door was locked. Just as the cousin reached me in the hallway, I screamed a little, ran into the den and slammed the door in his face, immediately turning the lock all in one motion. That room was even darker, so the first thing I wanted to do was to turn on the light, but I couldn't find one anywhere. I searched for the light because I wanted to push something else in front of the door, knowing that the little door lock was not a strong one. But I couldn't find light anywhere, and within about 2 minutes, I could hear the cousin fiddling with the locks. He got it open so fast, he might as well have used a key. So now he had me where he wanted me, and he quickly closed and relocked the door. We were now completely alone in the dark room, with nowhere around to stop him. The twins had stayed in their beds throughout, and there was nothing they could have done anyway. This guy then very quickly grabbed me towards him, putting one hand over my mouth and nose so I could neither scream nor breathe very well. His other hand went right between my legs, and he was touching me in my most private place, because I was at his mercy and barely breathing. He quietly said things in my ears as I struggled to breathe and somehow defend myself. He was behind me, and his arms were wrapped around mine in such a way that I couldn't use them. I'd been in a similar situation with a man in my not-so-distant past, so this time I was angry. I did not want to do this to happen to me again. He went on for a few minutes, which seemed like an eternity. And just when I thought I'd run out of hope, miraculously there was a knock on the door of the den. It was my friend C. She hadn't woken up when I was pounding on her bedroom door, but some kind of divine interventions had somehow caused her to wake up now. "What's going on in there?" she asked. The man tightened his grip on my mouth and nose so they couldn't make a sound. And he said to her, "We're okay, we're okay." And here I tried all my might to at least make some kind of sound. But since I couldn't get a breath in, I couldn't manage it. I will forever be eternally grateful for my friend C at that moment, as she didn't just go back to the bed thinking I was messing around with her cousin. Instead, she said that she wanted to hear me say I was okay, and that's when the cousin knew he had lost and let go of me. I immediately screamed, "Help me!" and I ran into her bedroom with her falling behind me. She then closed and locked the bedroom door. I was gasping for air, crying and trying to tell her everything that had happened. She had trouble calming me down, as I was still terrified, and I told her that he could pick her lock if he wanted to, and would come in and get me. She promised that she wouldn't let that happen, and much later I was somehow able to fall asleep. In the morning, I woke up instantly, afraid of remembering what had happened the night before, and C wasn't in the room with me. I panicked for a moment, thinking the cousin was still somewhere in the house, but after a moment, I had my friend talking with her mom, who had arrived back home. I joined them at the table and learned that C had already filled her mom in on everything. Her mom told me she was sorry about what had happened, and that morning she had already thrown the cousin out of the house, and that he would never be allowed to come back. At that moment I had been certain I was going to report it, as I hadn't reported my previous assault, because I felt like it had somewhat been my fault and I didn't want anyone to find out about it. I was still struggling with the decision, but this time I was angry, and I did not deserve to have that happen to me. These people had felt like my second family for a while, and that mom was my boss at the job I enjoyed very much. I didn't want to hurt them, and I certainly didn't want to jeopardize my relationship with the mom and my job. The most important thing was, though, is this time. I knew none of it had been my fault, and I knew my worth. I realized that no matter what a woman does, nothing gave a man the right to force himself upon her. And I had gained quite a bit of strength through this experience. So the point was not whether I'd reported the incident or not. I'm going to leave that part up to you, the reader, to decide. To all women, even men, that I recommend carrying a pepper spray in a stun gun, as I do it now. I won't get into discussion about guns, but you can still stop an attacker, even a dog or a bear, even from a distance of up to 4 yards with a pepper spray, and up close you can disable them with a stun gun and get away safely without killing anyone. My wish for everyone listening this is to please stay safe and be aware of your surroundings.
The new house on the Edmonton. We will call it the new house. The house is quite old, older than one can imagine it to be. But it is called the new house as every month there is a new family that comes to live in that house, and every month they move away. The new house on the Edmonton is a place that you definitely want to stay away from. It has been more of a fun experience for us as a neighborhood watching all these families get spooked out and leaving too soon. But for us, it has been hilarious trails to see them all go. All families leaving one by one. Was the house haunted? Yes, it was. But why were we not bothered by it? Well, the answer was clear when the Donald family moved here. As per routine, the first day of Donald family was calm and collective, and then, the very next day, they saw their first apparition in the house, and the second day, things were moving fast for them. The Donalds were a weird bunch. They almost had no luggage when they came to the place. The first step they took was completely make it different. The things were placed different, and they were in some very weird things. And we realized there was something more to them, and we soon realized it. The second week during midnight, they did the ceremony of catching a ghost. They made sure that somebody watched so they could set up the live stream, and as they did, they continued the ceremony. And when they did, they turned out to smoke a weird herb, and what it did was mellowed the ghost, and it fell and rolled out over the front. They quickly jumped out on the ghost, and after a while, they revealed the true identity of the ghost. It was the real estate agent who would try to lure all these people out so he can scam them and the company could get commissions from the house. It was the most hilarious scam we ever saw in the neighborhood, and we were sorry for those poor souls who fell for the stupid joke. Everybody still talks about people who fell for the ghost in the new house. I work as a security/nighttime attendant at an apartment building. It's 24 stories and one of the oldest in the city. One night, I'm sitting here when the phone rings at about 3 a.m. and I answer, "Hello, this is Daniel with Front Desk. How can I help you?" The voice on the other end sounds female, but was totally garbled, and the only bit I could make out was 23rd floor. I tried to tell the person that I could not understand them, and asked which apartment they were in, but again, gobbled the response. And I just made out 23rd floor. After the third time of trying to understand them, and the same response, I said I couldn't understand them. I would go up and meet them in the hallway, so I go to the main elevators, and surprise, surprise, they are both on the 23rd floor. Fortunately, we have an older service elevator, and it's only on the 7th, so I call it down, get it, and hit the button for the 23rd. But it won't move and the inner door won't close. But I go to unlock the reset panel, and boom, we start going up. Door's still open and freaking out a bit, and the elevator is shaking because it goes up pretty fast and isn't old. As I'm ascending, I just stay towards the back, and finally, I reach floor 23. I step out, door closes just fine, and I look around the hallway. There's nobody around. I walk along slowly, trying to listen for anyone awake who might have called, but there's nothing. So now, I head in the opposite direction and go towards where the regular elevators are. And when I get to them, they're just sitting there and their doors open. I was pretty freaked out, but I knew it would just be the elevator going Fred's. So I get in and figured out just reset them and get them to floor 1. When I heard the sound of the back stairwell closing, I quickly get out, go to the stairwell, and lo and behold, there's no one there. But the maintenance door to the machine room is ajar. And at that time, I'm the only one in the building with a key. At the top of the building is a large machine room housing all the really loud machinery that does stuff in the building and allows access to the roof. I don't like going into there because it's creepy as hell, and no one ever goes in there. So at this point, I'm seriously freaked out, but muster up and head inside. "Hello," I shout, but to no response. The lights in the room flicker because they're terrible fluorescent, so I can't see well either. But at the end of the room, I can make up the roof access door and show us how it's slightly open. So I slowly continue forward, checking the space in between each machine as I walk by to make sure there's no one there. And there isn't. I open the roof door access. I can't see anyone ahead of me on the roof, but there is a slight wraparound if there was a jumper or something I needed to be sure. So I step out and leave the door ajar. Like it was almost immediately, the door is pulled shut. Now I might have written off as wind or something, but this door is hard to shut and really hard to open. Really hard. I immediately grab the handle and yank it open, slam it behind me, and run straight for the maintenance door. It automatically locks when it's closed, so I slam it shut too, and go back to the 23rd floor hallway. Get into an elevator which the doors are still open for, and go all the way down to the first floor. I go back to the main lobby, and as soon as I sit down, the phone rings. I pick it up. Don't say a word, and sure as hell, gobbly voice again. The only audible thing I can hear is a voice saying 23rd floor. I hung up the phone, turned off the ringer, and spent the rest of the evening just staring at the parking garage security monitor. There's been a bunch of creepy things happening in this building. It's basically like the Overlook Hotel at night. I walked past a dark room here on the first floor once and swore I saw myself standing inside it. The next night, as I'm inside said room cleaning, the lights flip off, and I turned around to see a quick flash of myself walking past there. Must be some creepy ghost or something playing games with me at work. Why was it trying to leave me onto the roof of beer holding? I can only speculate perhaps it wanted to throw me off.
I was hired to do a catalog shoot for a national company. The shoot was scheduled for August of 2014 in rural Montana. On the time Ken and I flew in, was driven to a quaint lodge in the mountains in which the shoot was based out of. I was introduced to a lady running the shoot from the company side. We had worked together once or twice in the past, and I was happy to be working with her again. She and I were soon joined by her assistant. The three of us spoke for a short time before I was shown to my accommodations. I had arrived late in the day, so after eating a small dinner, I turned in. The next morning, everyone involved with the shoot, maybe 12 people in all, met in a large hall for breakfast. Upon the completion of our meal, myself, the lady running the shoot, and her assistant cut into a Jeep and went in search of shooting locations. The models and a couple of other people I don't remember followed us in another Jeep. After an hour or more of driving, I spotted the beautiful rocky outcropping and the lighting was fantastic on that day. So very little extra work was needed to get the shots I was looking for. A few hours later, I was done with that location. It was time for lunch anyway. The Jeep with the models returned to the lodge. However, my counterpart convinced me to see some breathtaking areas she'd seen on a walk the day before. She said she had arrived early in the morning and decided to take a walk before my plane landed. That sounded fine to me, and she insisted it wasn't that far. We'll be back for lunch soon after the others, no problem. After a 5-minute drive limited to the location, she led us about 100 yards down a trail that ended on a sheer ledge. No doubt it was a gorgeous spot, but I could see without the right light, the photos wouldn't be able to do it justice. I mentioned this, and she was close to the edge to get a better look. She went out much further than I would have recommended. However, I guess she was more occupied with her work than with her safety. After taking one too many steps, the loose rock off the cliff broke free, causing her to tumble down the sheer cliff. Her assistant, this cute and kind little girl, rushed forward. And if I had not stopped her, she probably would have followed her employer down the hill. Instead, I had her get a strong hold on me, and I slowly and carefully scooted toward the remaining ledge. I took a big breath and let it out, then looked over to see the poor woman curled up about 75 feet from us. She didn't move at first, and I feared the worst. However, the longer I stared at her, I began to see her body make small, almost indistinguishable movements. I let her assistant know this and asked if she could drive. She said yes, so I told her to run back to the Jeep and get help. Quicker than lightning, she ran down the trail, and a moment later, I could see the Jeep flying down the road in the direction of the lodge. Even if she was unable to respond, I wanted her to know help was on the way. I yelled down to her and could only hope she could hear what I was saying. The minutes seemed to drag on, but within an hour, a rescue team arrived to help. The 2 men were lowered down with a special stretcher, and they attached it to her. When she was raised back to the top, it was clear that she was badly injured, but still alive. An ambulance took her away. All that was left was the waiting. The shoot was obviously on hold until a decision was made on how to proceed. It was ultimately decided to cancel, at least for the foreseeable future. And that was the end of my part in this awful mess. I received no news for a few months, but then I got a call from her. The last 9 weeks had been a near nightmare for herself and her family. The initial swelling on her brain was so bad she was put into a coma. This would eventually pass, but the long hours of being stuck in bed almost drove her crazy. List of broken bones in her body went well into the double digits. Even at the time we were speaking, she was still working on crutches. Over the years since the accident, she and I have kept in contact. At the time of me writing this, she had 5 surgeries on various bones and parts of her body, and will no doubt have several more before she dies. Despite the awful violence of the fall and the long, agonizing convalescence she suffered through, she still has an ostrich sense of humor. On her last call just a week ago, she said if she could do it all over again, she might pick a shorter distance to fall from. A true heroine, if I ever seen one.